governments seem to be doing everything they can to support it, cutting taxes, paying money to consumers, very little support for encouraging additional public transport use. We may well see airlines starting to impose fuel surcharges, and that may have the impact that we need.
Be interesting to see what happens next winter. Julian, thank you very much indeed. Bloomberg's Julian Lee on what is happening in the crude market. Let's turn back to one of our top stories this hour here at Bloomberg, an exclusive. European banks led by BNP Paribas stand to benefit. This after global regulators have now agreed to start treating the euro area as one market in determining capital requirements for these top lenders, these systemically important top lenders. Let's bring in now Bloomberg's Nicholas Comfort, Bloomberg's European finance reporter from Frankfurt. Nick, let's just talk about this. Can you just walk me through the details of what is being proposed here and why it can be so significant for banks like BNP?
So what we're talking about are the so-called G-SIB buffers. So that's for the mega banks of the world. They have to, given they're so big and so important to the world economy, they have to have a capital buffer on top of all the other buffers that they have. And the way that's calculated is the bigger you are, the more complex you are, the higher the buffer. And one of the factors that goes into that to complexity is how many markets do you operate in? Are you sort of just a handful of countries, or are you really global in lots of different countries? And for the longest time, the euro area, the banking union, has been treated as a series of different markets. But the banks argue, well, hey, we share a currency, we have a common supervisor at ECB, we have a common resolution framework for when banks go bust. So look at us as one market. And it seems like that argumentation, which is one which is shared also by the ECB and some regulators, has won the day, and that peers of the ECB around the world are going to recognize this and then allow this to be seen as one market, which then makes these banks appear less complex, which would lower the capital requirement we expect for BNP Paribas. Yep. Also, interestingly, for other banks, it'll allow them to grow, to get bigger, maybe even with cross-border deals, because they won't have to fear that higher capital requirement.
We've been struggling with the banking union. We've been struggling to make it work. We've been struggling to understand why we haven't seen those cross-border mergers. Is this the kind of the break in the dam that could potentially generate that move?
This certainly helps banks plan for big mergers. It's one of the top concerns for bank executives when thinking about buying a competitor in another euro area country. But I got to say, if I was sitting at the Basel Committee table, I would be saying, well, look, guys, you're not really making that much progress on banking union. If we look at the plans for a common deposit protection system here in Europe, they're bogged down and probably going nowhere. And so, I think while it's a victory for the banks, it's really only half of the battle. If I was a bank executive, I would also be waiting for other progress to really feel comfortable about buying a competitor in the euro area.
We're nearly there. Nick, great stuff. Thank you very much indeed. Fantastic story on the Bloomberg terminal. Nick Comfort, Bloomberg's European finance reporter. Thank you very much indeed. Quick look at the markets. US is closed, light volume here in Europe. We're down by around a third in terms of the volume that we're seeing. Nevertheless, the stock 600 is bid today. We're trading higher. The China news certainly helping out. We're seeing a number of the luxury names catching a bid today. Stocks like LVMH. Brent also up on that China story as well, up by around 0.3%. This is Bloomberg.
When you think of cutting-edge technology at sea, you might be thinking of stuff like this. But there's an incoming revolution on the high seas that isn't quite as sexy, but could be significantly more impactful.
From
container shipping is the key component of global trade. About 80 or 90% of all the world's goods are transported at sea at some point.
But there's a significant unseen cost to the modern era of global commerce.
About 3% of all the world's CO2 emissions come from shipping.
3% may not sound like a lot, but that's roughly comparable to the entire CO2 output of Germany. Since reducing trade isn't a likely option, what about a technological improvement to help reduce the emissions from these well-stocked maritime behemoths?
"35 minutes until European markets shut up shop for the day. Light volume, US closed Memorial Day. Stock 600 still up by 0.6%. Brent crude, one of the stories though, 120 is where we are trading. There's lots to discuss. We need to focus on what is going to happen here in Europe next. We're going to do that after the huge inflation prints today with Bill Al-Hafiz. He's going to join us from Macro Hive. That's next. This is Bloomberg.
When you think space, you probably think one space agency that travels under the radar is ESA, which is surprising considering what the European Space Agency has achieved and how vital it is to the global space industry.
We've collaborated with pretty much everybody who is involved in space exploration.
ESA wants to be a leading force in furthering humanity's mission into space.
Commander Ground, do you copy? Copy.
If we want to have successful human missions to Mars, we are going to have to learn to live and work off-world in a different way. The place where we are going to learn to do that is on the moon.
Can ESA help humanity take its next giant leap?
Why do the biggest names in business choose Bloomberg?
That is a great question.
It's a great question.
It's a great question.
Great question.
Great question.
Great question.
Great question.
That's going to be the best question I get all night.
I'm glad you asked that. Bloomberg Television. Top experts. Great questions. However you get your news.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak with Lee.
On Bloomberg Radio.
Welcome to Daybreak Australia. This is Bloomberg Technology. This is Bloomberg Green.
On TV, radio, and the web. This is Bloomberg.
Monday the 30th of May, European stocks are higher. The countdown to the close starts right now.
The countdown is on in Europe. This is Bloomberg Markets European Close with Guy Johnson and Alex Steele.
4 o'clock in London with 30 minutes to go until the close. Let's check and see exactly where equity markets are right now and then talk about some of the other assets. So you've got Stock 600 up. Luxury stocks are doing quite well. The reason for that, China reopening is potentially going to open the door to further profitability there after a period of long suppressed growth. You've also got euro dollar on the move as well today. So you've got a bit of a bid in euro dollar, 107.77. We're just seeing some comments coming through from Governor Waller over at the Fed. Governor Waller supporting hiking by 50 bids for several meetings. So there's this real debate around whether or not you get 2 more, 3 more, even potentially more than that, 50 basis point hikes from the Fed. And certainly it looks like Governor Waller's coming through at the hawkish end of that spectrum. So Chris Waller's talking about several 50 basis point hikes, and he's talking about moving above neutral, but basically he's kind of cautioning beyond that. Certainly he's supporting to move above neutral by year end. 50 basis point hikes ought to be on the table in until inflation is closer to 2%. Now we're miles away from 2% right now. So if they keep hiking through that, we potentially could have an awfully long way to go. This obviously sits with the narrative we're developing here in Europe about the potential for the ECB to have to go faster. We've seen today a harmonized print out of Spain at 8.5%. You've got a harmonized print out of Germany at 8.7%. So there's a lot to discuss here. Then you've got to factor in what is happening with China as well. A reopening trade, that's going to boost demand, but it's also potentially going to ease up on the supply side, which could help deal with some of these inflationary headwinds that we're dealing with at the moment. So let's bring into the conversation to try and discuss all of this Bilal Hafeez, the CEO and head of research over at Macro Hive. Let's start with that. 50 basis point hikes for several meetings. You guys discuss this all the time at Macro Hive about how high the Fed ultimately is going to have to go. Where do you land at the moment?
I mean, we're actually very aggressive. So we think at least back to 5.25, which is where the Fed was before the global financial crisis. And we think there's a real possibility they could go to almost 8% based on the Taylor rules. It's a very punchy view, I know.
So 8%, equate that into equities for me.
That would be equities much lower in that context. And you know, equities in our view, a large part of what's driven equities higher is lower interest rates since the global financial crisis, but also if we do get interest rates up to 8%, that will crush earnings. And at the moment, equities are fairly optimistic on earnings.
So your view is that the Fed is more about inflation and less about growth, so a recession is possible?
Absolutely,
almost probable in that kind of
almost
scenario
probable in that scenario. I think with the scenario of raising rates to not just 8, but even 4, 5, that's recession territory in our view. And the reason we say this is that inflation is very high in the US. So even if inflation does fall, it could end up being 4, 5% by the end of this year, inflation. And the Fed will need to raise rates a lot to get it down to 2%. And that's
do you think they're really going to go for 2%? Yeah, I speak to a lot of people about this, and nobody seems to believe that the Fed, apart from Chris Waller apparently, is targeting 2%. The Fed will be happy with 3-4% inflation. That's the balancing act. You get inflation down, you get it to a manageable level, but you don't crash the economy into a wall.
I mean, it's obviously a delicate balance. I mean, I think in the end, a large part of it will be the political response to inflation at 3% or so. You know, will households still be complaining about inflation if inflation's at 3%?
So there's another headline crossed a little while ago. Joe Biden's going to meet with Fed Chair Jerome Powell Tuesday. So that could be an interesting meeting. How do you think that discussion will go? You just laid out a economy that's going to be hit and hit hard. If you're a politician, and I know Joe Biden's been calling for the fact that the Fed needs to do its job and get inflation down, do you really want that? How do you think that meeting's going to go? If you were a fly on the wall, what do you think will be discussed there?
Well, I think the main focus there will be inflation. And if you look at political polling in the US, the biggest issue for the public is inflation, much more so than fears about the job market and so on. So I think he will, encourage Powell to do something about inflation. The challenge here is that you have a supply shock going on as well. So the Fed only has a certain amount of control in this context. Now, if the Fed is the only tool you have to bring inflation down, then that means they'll have to raise rates dramatically if Biden isn't doing anything else on the other side, on the supply side.
Let's talk about the ECB a little bit. 8.7% print in Germany today. So you've got inflation up here, 8.7, and you've got the ECB down here with a negative 50 depot rate. How quickly does that spread need to close?
I think fairly quickly. I mean, what the ECB has been saying is that this is transitory. We've heard this before, with the US. It's also saying that a large amount of this is related to commodities, so not necessarily outside of commodities. Now, the data we're seeing at the moment tells us that even the turn in commodity-related inflation hasn't happened yet. So this was a month where inflation was supposed to come off a bit, but instead it's gone up a lot. So I think there's a huge amount of pressure by the ECB to do something. There still is this debate within the ECB on what to do here.
I'm going to come back. We're going to talk more about this in the next block. China is the other question that we're watching so carefully today. A reopening potentially in Beijing, a reopening potentially in Shanghai coming through this week. Is that good news or bad news? Because on the good news side, it's going to potentially ease up supply chain stories, and it's going to potentially provide a little bit more demand. But that demand story could be negative as well. Oil prices back up to 120, potentially going higher from here.
Yeah, it's hard to say. Obviously, markets at the moment are taking it very positively because it's another bounce in Chinese demand. But for me, the larger question is how sustainable is this return, this lifting of the lockdown? Will we have another lockdown in a few weeks or not? What we don't know is the level of vaccination amongst the elderly population in China. That data is not easily available. Now, if the elderly population isn't highly vaccinated, then we know that there's a high probability of another lockdown if COVID cases pick up again. So I'm a bit sort of cautious around this.
Is that your base case? Is that your base case that we will see a series of lockdowns? That this is not the sort of the ending of this process? That the economic impact is still not big enough for the Chinese authorities ultimately to back off zero COVID?
It's hard to tell. That's the issue here. And the problem here is not just about the economic fallout of this, is that can you accept a high level of deaths amongst the elderly population if they're not vaccinated? And so that's the issue here. It's more about deaths of the elderly more than anything else.
But from an investment point of view, is this an entry point into China? Is this, if we see more stimulus, is that going to help that entry point as well? It's interesting to see that Chinese equities did well today, but not that well. And tech stocks in particular haven't done that well even on the back of that.
I mean, we still have all the regulatory issues because it seems like even if there's some lightening regulation, ultimately the direction of travel is one of regulating the private sort of tech sector. The other issue is that the most common transmission mechanism for stimulus is the property sector. And we know the property sector is impaired in China right now. So there's only so much that you can get a boost from that side. So overall, I'm quite skeptical of this story. Near term, obviously, we could see some positive momentum. But bigger picture, I still think there's not enough from China to call this the big rally in markets.
Okay, I want to come back. I want to talk more about what's happening with the ECB and the UK in just a moment. Fascinating call out from Bank of America, Bilal, a little bit earlier on. Bilal Hafiz, the CEO and head of research at Macro Hive, is sticking with us. Keeping you up to date now from around the world. Here with the First Word News, Angel Feliciano.
Guy, in Germany, inflation has hit another all-time high. That adds urgency to the European Central Bank's exit from pandemic-era stimulus. Consumer prices in Europe's biggest economy rose 8.7% from a year ago in May. Inflation was driven by soaring food and energy costs. European Union nations still haven't broken the stalemate over a Russian oil embargo. So far, Hungary is refusing to back a compromise on sanctions, despite proposals aimed at ensuring the country keeps receiving Russian oil.
We've been working very hard and successful with 5 sanction packages already. It's never been easy. It's the same now with the 6th package. The Commission and the French presidency have been working intensively in the last days to move forward on this package. We are not there yet, but it has matured for sure. My expectations are low that it will be solved in the next 48 hours.
All EU member nations have to agree on sanctions for them to be imposed. And in Nepal, the wreckage of a plane that crashed in the Himalayas has been discovered. The bodies of 17 of the 22 people on board have been recovered. The turboprop Twin Otter lost contact with an airport control tower Sunday while on a 20-minute flight. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Angel Feliciano. This is Bloomberg.
Connection lost.
When you think space, you probably think one space agency that travels under the radar is ESA, which is surprising considering what the European Space Agency has achieved and how vital it is to the global space industry.
We've collaborated with pretty much everybody who is involved in space exploration.
But ESA wants to be a leading force in furthering humanity's mission into space.
Commander Ground, do you copy? Copy.
If we want to have successful human missions to Mars, we are going to have to learn to live and work off-world in a different way. And the place where we are going to learn to do that is on the moon.
Can ESA help humanity take its next giant leap?
A lot's happening on Wall Street.
It's the basic law of economics.
It validated what the market was already pricing.
Need to catch up?
This is Bloomberg Wall Street Week. I'm David Weston.
We've got the information and insights.
David, you just hit the nail right on the head.
From businesses most influential and instrumental.
And that's the way you run good risk management.
It's a challenging dynamic.
We could continue to see that kind of strength.
Bloomberg Wall Street Week premieres Friday with replays all weekend on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
So German inflation hitting 8.7 in May. That is a data series high. Obviously, Germany has experienced higher inflation in the distant past, but this certainly adds to the urgency when it comes to the ECB and its exit from crisis-era stimulus. Let's go back to Frankfurt now. Jana Randau standing by for us. Jana, are we going to see an acceleration of the ECB's playbook here? The message from Christine Lagarde and her chief economist, Philip Lane, of late has been one of caution, but one of needing to do something in order to stem this inflation crisis. Is that caution going to prevail? Are we going to now have to see actually the ECB moving even quicker at a time when other central banks are certainly pressing on the accelerator?
There's certainly a case to be made for that. The ECB has always said it's very data dependent in its actions. And we've seen this morning that Spanish inflation has come in higher than expected this afternoon, that German price pressures are much stronger than expected. And we'll get an idea of where the euro area is tomorrow when data will arrive. And policymakers are meeting.
Sorry, carry on, Jana.
Yes. Policymakers are meeting, of course, very soon and will decide. Christine Lagarde has already said asset purchases will end at the start of July. Rate hikes will follow later on that month. And there is a debate to be had about how big that first rate increase will have to be. There are certainly voices that are getting louder from the hawkish side of the spectrum that 50 basis points
we
may
talked
be
about this. Yeah, 50 basis points. How big a shift would that be? And would that be 50 basis points and then expecting the market to extrapolate more 50 basis points hikes in the way that the Fed is doing right now? What would be the message from a 50 basis point hike, do you think?
It's certainly not the mainstream scenario. Philip Lane has been rather cautious lately. But if you read carefully what President Lagarde has said, she doesn't exclude such a step. So she has said lift off in July, the end of negative rates by the end of the third quarter, whether that is zero or slightly positive for the deposit rate, which is currently at minus 0.5%. She said both is possible and will depend on data.
Yeah. What would how big a concern would fragmentation risk be at that point, were we to see a 50 basis point hike being delivered? You'd get a very big reaction in BTPs.
Yeah, I mean, that has been a concern for the past months, fragmentation. Bond yields have gone up across the region. And so far, policymakers don't seem to be extremely concerned about the spreads. They have widened, but not to the same extent that we've seen before in previous episodes of crises. The vice president said last week that spreads are nowhere near levels that trigger similar responses than in the past. So overall, it's quite contained. But clearly, there is a risk that the situation will deteriorate, and that is something that they're going to look very closely at.
Jana, great stuff as ever. Thank you very much indeed. Jana Rando joining us from Frankfurt. Still with us, Bilal Hafiz, CEO and head of head of research at Macro Hive. If the Fed's going to 8%, how high does the ECB need to go?
Well, much higher than what the market's pricing. I mean, it should go at least up to, say, 2-3% or so. However, the challenge for the ECB is that they are very worried about the economic fallout from the current sort of picture. So not, unlike the US, Europe has much more of an energy problem, and so they're trying to balance that out. And what's interesting with today's German inflation numbers are that Germany, while they have incredibly high inflation, they aren't calling for dramatic hikes by the ECB, and that tells you that the hit to the industrial sector is something that's top of mind for the German economy.
Do you think a 50 basis point hike is possible? Probable?
I think it's possible. I'm not sure if it's probable, just because the ECB is very cautious in how they're framing everything. So for now, I think 25 is the most likely outcome, but you can't rule it out.
And how do you think, to the question of fragmentation, how do you think BTPs react? I presume there'd be a massive sell-off.
Yeah, I think there'll be a big sell-off. The issue at the moment is that BTPs have sold off, but if you look at their sell-off relative to bonds and to treasuries, it's kind of what you'd expect in some ways. It hasn't weakened a lot more than the beta would say relative to those markets. So we're not in panic stage right now, but I do think if we were to see 50, it would widen quite significantly.
Can I just take you to the UK, Bank of America?
Sure.
And we were chuckling about this a little bit earlier on, because there's been plenty of calls for sterling crises over the years. I think I've lived through many calls for it, but not many actual sterling crises, though I have lived through a few. So Bank of America is saying that investors should hedge for an existential sterling crisis as the British currency struggles usually associated with emerging markets. While not wishing to over-exaggerate GBP's predicament as an end-of-day scenario, we are concerned that the increasing politicisation of the UK policy undermines the pound. This is the kind of end of that quote. Basically, we've seen a significant headwind on the supply side, a sense that the BOE is losing control over its mandate. I've seen these kinds of notes before. This time feels a little bit edgy for the UK, though. This time feels like it is actually sort of skirting on very, very thin ice. Skating even.
Yeah.
Or even skirting.
I think the UK does have these big challenges, but I would also say almost every other developed country also has the same issue. We talked about Germany and Europe, the US as well. Everybody has incredibly high inflation. Everybody has these same problems. Everybody has this challenge that central banks have been late to react to this inflation. So for me, the issue here is not so much about the UK, but it's more about developing markets as a whole. At the moment, the way the UK is behaving is similar to the way Europe's behaving in the US. So it's not, too different. So I think a sole focus on the UK may be somewhat myopic in the sense of you just have to look at the bigger picture. And overall, DM markets are seeing higher inflation than EM.
The issue with the UK is, and the Bank of America note addresses this, is that the UK is not prepared to talk about the supply side. We're not addressing, there doesn't seem to be much political narrative around Brexit, which is a kind of almost a sort of unspoken at the moment. I think we're probably all glad that we're not speaking about Brexit in the same way that we were, but it has impacted the supply side. I'm starting to hear more and more calls for the fact that the UK, to your point you made earlier, does need significant supply side reform, and probably is at the kind of the forefront of needing that to happen, and fairly soon. If it doesn't happen, what are the implications?
No, I agree. I mean, for sure, there has to be something on the supply side. And I do agree the Brexit aspect is very important for the UK. And I think that inflation is higher than it otherwise would be without Brexit. On the supply side issue, I think that the whole world needs a supply side, reboot. Yep. Europe needs to wean itself off Russian energy. US needs to deal with deglobalization. So this is not just the UK issue. Now, in terms of if the UK doesn't do these supply side reforms, then what that does mean is that UK will have chronically higher inflation than other countries. But the question is how much higher? And in general, say UK versus Euro inflation before the global before COVID, UK in general had 1% or 2% higher inflation than the Eurozone. It didn't have a full-on crisis around that time either. So I'd separate a chronic or persistently high inflation from a crisis-type dynamic.
it would be remiss, and I think I said this to you last time, of me not to sort of speak to you about what is happening with Bitcoin, because you track it so carefully. We seem to be quite range-bound on Bitcoin, kind of circa 30,000 at the moment. I'm hearing a lot of calls to the downside. I'm hearing some calls to the upside. What is your best case right now?
My overall case is bearish for Bitcoin. In the end, it's highly correlated to equities. And equities, to some extent, have also been treading water. You know, S&P has been hovering around 4,000. We're up towards 4,200 now, and Bitcoin has been doing the same as well. But more generally, crypto, I think, has benefited a lot from low interest rates, just like tech stocks have. And so as we see interest rates go up, crypto will get hit quite hard. And I also think there's somewhat of a distinction that's starting to occur between Bitcoin and altcoins, or other coins as well, where Bitcoin is viewed as more of a safe haven versus the other coins as well. So there's an interesting bifurcation that's also happening as well.
How much damage has been done structurally to the market, though, by the failures of the stable coins? There's a lot of kind of tourists in the crypto market. There was a lot of talk about institutional money flowing into the crypto market. How put off has that kind of money been as a result of the turbulence that we've been seeing? I appreciate the correlation with other assets, but structurally things have changed within the market as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's, for me, I think the biggest shift has been more amongst the retail investors who are very sensitive to P&L, and many of them just came in on the expectation of higher returns. The institutional side, I think, ironically, has been less affected by the sell-offs. For them, there are other issues for them. You know, the regulatory backdrop, how is regulation going to change to allow them to adopt these markets? So institutions, I think, are not necessarily as scared as you'll think. I think retail is the one that's really been affected by this.
You say you're bearish. How bearish?
Well, I think Bitcoin could easily go down towards 24,000, 25,000, you know, in the next 3 to 6 months, perhaps even lower as well.
What will get it even lower? I've heard some people are talking about we could get back down to single digits.
Into like below the 10,000s, into like single. Yeah, I mean, that's also possible. I think the way that would happen is if we were to see much higher interest rates and a recession type dynamic. If that was to happen together, then that's very,
so, okay,
very
so let's bring this all together, this whole conversation. You started off the conversation talking about 8% interest rates in the United States. That would be stocks significantly lower. Where would that put Bitcoin by extension?
That would then put Bitcoin closer to, you know, the 8,000, 9,000 mark, you know, at that stage, if we were to see this.
Okay. It's been an interesting conversation, Bilal. Thank you very much indeed. Bilal Hafiz, CEO and Head of Research over at Macro Hive. We're heading towards the end of the day here in Europe. As I say, Memorial Day in the States, light volume, but nevertheless, some interesting trades going through. Luxury stocks have done well today. I've been surprised the car makers haven't done a little bit better, but nevertheless, luxury has powered Europe today. The European markets on light volume are up by around 0.6% with the stock 600. Brent's trading circa 120 again on that oil trade, picking up a bit of steam actually over the last hour. Yields are higher, prices of bonds are lower, particularly on the periphery, on the back of the inflation prints. And euro dollar trading in the high 107s, 107.79. This is Bloomberg.
Exclusive interviews with the most influential figures in finance. Lloyd Blankfein.
Deflation is a terrible thing. Inflation you could tolerate.
Kathy Wood.
Tesla will be in the pole position to dominate.
Jeremy Grantham.
We've had a very, very abnormal honeymoon Goldilocks period.
First available on the Bloomberg Terminal, then on Bloomberg Television and Bloomberg.com. Front Row, the best seats in the house for business's greatest minds.
I think what we've seen during this period of time is that communicating via video is not a fad. We are using it in all aspects of our lives, for work, for learning, for communicating, for staying in touch.
So coming into the end of the day here in Europe, we're about to see the market close. Let's check some numbers before we get there. FTSE 100 up by 0.2%, flirting with 7,600 right now. What we're actually seeing today is some of the big drug stocks under quite significant pressure. You're not just seeing it in the UK, but you are seeing it in the UK to a greater extent. Over on the continent, you've got the DAX and the CAC 40 trading a little bit higher. The CAC 40 in particular is fascinating today. So it's the big luxury names that are really driving it. You've also got L'Oreal trading higher. I guess that fits into that narrative as well. But it's names like LVMH and Kering that are doing a lot of the heavy lifting. This on the back of China starting to talk about the fact that it's going to loosen some of the restrictions. The luxury stocks have huge exposure into China, as we all know. So any kind of a sign, potentially, that we are going to see some of the restrictions going, and these stocks respond very, very quickly. Big high beta trades. So the CAC 40's up by 0.6%, but names like Sanofi are still weaker today. Anyway, the European close is coming up. We'll deal with the details in just a moment. It is light volume today. It is Memorial Day in the United States. This is Bloomberg.
About what they call black soot caused by the manufacturing and consumption of these fuel products in the illegal refineries.
Oil theft, known as bunkering, and the refining of its spoils is worsening the damage from decades of fossil fuel exploitation, creating one of the world's most severe ecological disasters.
Our sacred forests, our homes, have to give way to oil wells, and no one gets much benefit.
Imagine a resident of Port Harcourt who inhales this soot every second in 24 hours, 7 days a week, 30 days in the month, and for years now. We are dying slowly but surely, and our lifespan is reducing every day.
So we're wrapping up the session here in Europe. It's a Monday. It's a quiet Monday. The US is out. volumes are light. Nevertheless, I think some interesting trades that are worth focusing on. This is the picture across Europe. So the CAC 40 and the DAX are both up 0.7, 0.8%. Underperformance coming through, though, from the UK today, which is interesting. Drug stocks in particular look like some real heavyweight drug stocks I'm talking about here. Looks like they're underperforming a little bit. So the FTSE 100 actually being dragged down there. Some of the oil stocks, interesting enough, are also not putting on some gains today, despite actually some higher Brent prices we're seeing. So the DAX is up by 0.8%. The CAC 40 up by 0.7%. How's the session developed? As I say, it's been a cautious session. Without the United States to add the volume in, we are seeing a slightly lighter volume day. So this has been how we've been trading. Relatively tight range. Nothing really to give us a clear sense of direction. Bit of a gap higher first thing on the back of the China news. And then, to be honest, we've just drifted higher. We're only up by 0.6%. And as I say, a little bit of a drift higher coming through here. In terms of the sector breakdown and some of the other asset classes that we're watching, let's take a little look at first the other assets because they are contributing into some of the moves that we're seeing. Brent crude trading circa 120. The German 10-year is up by 8 basis points today. But take a look at the periphery. This on the back of some really strong inflation prints from Spain and Germany today. Tomorrow we get the Eurozone number. Watch out for it. People are beginning to talk, and Jana Randau was talking about this a little bit earlier from Frankfurt, talking about the idea that you could see 50 basis points coming through from the ECB. That would certainly propel the euro-dollar significantly higher. We're up by around 0.4% today, trading at 107. High 107s, nearly 108 right now. Quick look at the sector breakdown, just as we work our way through this, just to give you an idea of what is happening here, because I think it is significant. Definitely a China-focused story today, I would argue. So you're seeing the luxury stocks doing well today. That sector up by around 2.5%. Technology's doing well. Travel and leisure, interestingly enough, also having a fairly solid day today. Retail's doing well. Bottom end, much more defensive bias to this market. Utilities, telecoms, food and beverage. That's where you're seeing the underperformance coming through today. So definitely a kind of more risk-on sense from a sector story in this market. Let's talk about some individual stocks. I've just been mentioning what's happening in the luxury sector, but I want to start with Cineworld. Top Gun Maverick came out this weekend. I think Europe actually got to see it even before the United States. Certainly my kids are itching to go and watch it, as am I. A lot of people have already been to see it. It was an absolute smash at the cinemas this weekend. And as a result, we are seeing, as you can see, Cineworld Group trading up really strongly on the back of that. 14, nearly 15% the gain on the back of Maverick being back. Luxury stocks, though, are doing well. LVMH up by nearly 3%. That's a hugely heavily weighted story. And then I was maybe going to talk about Daimler Cars. We've got Daimler Trucks, but nevertheless, the China story probably fits into that narrative as well. China, a big factor when it comes to the auto sector. Some interesting changes in the quota system out in China in terms of people being able to buy vehicles, which, remember, is heavily quotarized, and also some big bonuses coming through in terms of EV purchases as well. Remember, we have seen virtually no cars being sold in China over the last few months. The China story, very much part of the narrative that we've been watching with our MLive team today, our Markets Live team, very much focused on what is happening with the Chinese economy and what investors anticipate on what happens next with COVID zero policies and the impact that they're going to have on the markets. China PMIs, remember, due tomorrow, going to provide us with some new indications as to whether or not growth is bottoming out, even as restrictions in those major cities continue. This is what we've heard.
I like China.
Many people calling it uninvestable, but there's also a very wide margin of safety.
September, October, they will start one of the biggest fiscal impulses in human history.
We've turned the corner in terms of policy action, and that should be supportive for markets.
And there's also a possibility that they reopen and that they stimulate the economy.
Probably is the part of the world where you'll see economic activity resume more quickly.
A lot of the attractive long-term growth drivers are still intact. We will be cautious and prudent in this environment, but are optimistic about China as a country.
We're expecting to increase our exposure in China.
I actually just see a deepening of relationships into China.
Really mixed views. Amazing. Very wide dispersion. Nobody can quite call China right now, or at least have a degree of confidence in doing so. One area that we've been watching certainly very carefully is what has been happening in the car market. Now, EV growth forecasts are tumbling. Shanghai last month, not a single vehicle was sold. So let's talk about what reopening could bring to this market Craig Trudell, Bloomberg Global also reporter, joining us now to give us a sense. Just the background, how much of an impact have these lockdowns have in terms of the huge Chinese car market?
Yeah, you mentioned the city of Shanghai. I mean, it was really breathtaking to see a goose egg for last month. And it's not just obviously the sales, right? It's the production. And that is actually a city that is a major source of production for companies like Tesla.
Yep.
And I mean, you know, you've also seen major disruptions to Volkswagen and Toyota. So, you know, just today we saw out of Toyota a lower than expected production for the month of April. They still have managed to better, you know, sort of struggle through this disruption that they felt in China than Volkswagen, which, you know, through April, worldwide sales down 30% for Volkswagen. So, you know, this market getting back on its feet production-wise is going to be a big deal for companies that have a lot of exposure. VW, among the foreign car makers, is as big as they come still, even after a couple of, you know, rough months and rough years, honestly, for them.
I want to talk about demand in just a moment, but also you talk to the auto producers and they reference China when it comes to not just their plants in China, but their plants around the world because of the supply chain and the component parts that are so dependent on China. If we start to see a reopening, how quickly do we start to see that easing?
Well, we saw even just with Tesla today, a Reuters report sort of, you know, laying out the idea that Tesla has gotten close to 70% of pre-lockdown production levels. So, you know, this has been a sort of day-to-day, week-to-week thing that has been followed very closely, just, you know, as is the nature of all things Tesla. And they really have sort of had a lot of false positives and sort of thinking that they're going to get back up, you know, if not fully on their feet, close to it. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be really challenging because you don't just spool up a supply chain overnight. As much as China is sort of renowned for being able to sort of, you know, more quickly and more quickly adapt to the realities and sort of on a dime change, you know, plans. It is difficult even for China to sort of, you know, go from zero or close to it back to where they were before all of these lockdowns.
Okay, let's go from supply to demand. As you say, like Shanghai, zero. Amazing to see a huge city like that with no vehicle sales. The Chinese authorities, and it feels like they're tiptoeing into this, are starting to announce a few little things to help out consumers. Can you just walk us through what we're seeing and what impact you think they might have?
Yeah, to be honest, the authorities probably don't have to do much. I mean, if you look at the way sales have been trending globally, really with the exception of here in Europe, auto sales demand has actually been extremely strong. This has been a production-constrained story. But to your point, we are seeing a little bit of you know, support in more rural areas for electric vehicles. Those are some of the places that, you know, arguably need a little bit more help, whereas in some of the mega cities, you don't necessarily need, you know, more subsidies. So we're going to see a phase out, is at least the plan still at the end of this year in terms of national subsidies, but we'll still see support on a more local level and a bit more targeted. And there is a sort of question of whether or not that phase out the end of this year might also be reconsidered. That we've seen some rumblings of that recently. There is just a question of whether or not that's really needed, because we have seen really strong uptake in China versus you know, really anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what the long-lasting effect of all of this is. Craig, great stuff as ever. Thank you very much indeed. Bloomberg's Craig Trudell on what is happening with the reopening story and the auto market. European stocks have finished for the day. Let me just give you a quick idea of what has happened in terms of the auction, just to see what has happened. A little dip by the looks of things, judging by those numbers that I see on the screen in front of me. Yeah, but not much of one. Just a tiny kind of movement during the auction process that has taken us to a position where we're almost exactly on that 7,600 level for the FTSE 100. So those are the closing prices for European equity markets. Let's get up to date now with the news from around the world. Here with the first word, Angel Feliciano.
Guy, China has reported the fewest new cases of the coronavirus in almost 3 months. The easing of outbreaks in Beijing and Shanghai has led officials to relax some of the strictest virus controls. Shanghai has rolled out a raft of measures to support its lockdown-hit economy. Russia is planning a bond payment mechanism to sidestep U.S. sanctions and a potential default. The proposal would allow foreign investors to open accounts in Russian banks in both rubles and hard currency. Russia's finance minister told a newspaper that unlike the previous payment system, investors would be able to access the funds without restriction. And on Capitol Hill, lawmakers are setting a timetable to negotiate a new gun laws. Democrats are signaling they would accept limited progress in exchange for some action that would reduce gun violence in the nation. Some Republicans are indicating interest in gun control legislation following the elementary school massacre in Texas. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Angel Feliciano. This is Bloomberg.
Companies now, they're getting hundreds, maybe even thousands of applications. So software has come in to automate the process.
You want to write your resume for robots, not for humans. The only job your resume has is to be comprehensible to the software that is reading it, because that software or robot is going to decide whether or not a human ever gets their eyes on it.
These things are programmed by a certain segment of the population that might not be totally inclusive or not be fully aware.
Concerns about how this technology could exacerbate discrimination. For the FTC, I think foremost, the FTC needs to be making sure that we're fully understanding this technology.
We don't trust companies to self-regulate when it comes to pollution. We don't trust them to self-regulate when it comes to workplace comp. Why on earth would we trust them to self-regulate AI?
Bloomberg has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it. Now, you can simply type phrases in everyday English in the command line. Compare financials, find people, analyze markets. You can enter phrases or ask questions. What do you want to know today? Ask a question or visit SearchGo to find answers now.
So, European leaders are gathered today in Brussels. They are discussing, obviously, the oil embargo on Russia. Estonia's Prime Minister said earlier to Bloomberg that an EU agreement on Russian oil and the embargo upon it is unlikely to be reached today. She spoke to Bloomberg's Maria Tadeo before walking into the summit.
It seems to me that we will not reach an agreement today. You won't? No, that we will not. But maybe there is positive outcome of this. I know that there's a lot of work going on still.
And of course, when you see this from the outside, the reality is it's been almost a month since the head of the Commission announced this. The European Union promised the mother of all sanctions. If you're Russia and you look at the situation, perhaps you spot weakness. Is that a problem?
Well, Russia and Putin doesn't believe in multilateralism, and so far we have been very united, which has been a huge exercise considering that we had 27 different countries with 27 different internal politics going on. But we still try to keep the unity, and sometimes it was clear in the beginning that it will be more difficult when the sanctions move closer to us. First, there were sanctions that only hurt Russia, but now there are sanctions that also hurt European countries, and therefore we have different sensitivities.
And of course, you say the impact will be felt now by Europeans. There is no war that doesn't carry a cost. I wonder, however, all of this has to do with the victory of Ukraine. What is victory? What does it mean in your eyes? What's a victory of Ukraine over Russia? What does it look like?
Well, it's first of all to the Ukrainians to say, but when Russia goes back to its borders and also the war crimes are being punished for, prosecuted internationally so that aggression does not pay off. That is a clear sign, a signal to everybody that it can't work like this, that we have a peace agreement and everybody stays where they are, because a bad peace might mean that there are still atrocities for the people of those territories, and there will be a pause of 1 year, 2 years, and everything will continue in a much broader scale. So we have to be very firm.
Prime Minister Haller speaking to Bloomberg's Maria today a little earlier in Brussels. Let's get some more insight into what is happening here. Elizabeth Brawl, Resident Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, joining us now. Are we reaching the limits of what Europe can do when it comes to sanctioning Russia? We are struggling to get a deal done on oil. Makes you wonder whether gas would ever be possible.
We are, in a sense, reaching a limit, and for two reasons, I think, as the Prime Minister pointed out. We are now talking about sanctions that wouldn't just hurt Russia, but would hurt European companies and, as a result, European consumers as well. And in addition, the public is getting a little bit fatigued with this war. It's a terrible thing to say, but the war has been going on for 3 months, and obviously it's a tragedy for Ukraine. But the extreme interest that we saw in the early days of the war in Europe is wearing off, simply because it has been around for some time now, and it's terrible because the war is not over. But yet, the public, in order for sanctions to be successful, the public has to support them.
Absolutely. Just staying with the issue of the oil sanctions, Hungary is not budging. Does Hungary budge, do you think?
There are two issues there. Prime Minister Orban is clearly a bit of a difficult character within the European Union. Yeah. But there is also the other thing, which is that Hungary is extremely dependent on Russian energy. So if they were to agree to an embargo, they would have to find enormous amounts of energy somewhere else. And the tragedy is really that everybody is looking for energy somewhere else, and it would be very difficult for them to replace all that energy that they currently have coming from Russia with another source, when everybody else is looking for other sources as well.
As you say, the public is now shifting its attention away from the war. There is a certain amount of fatigue beginning to creep in, but the focus is now on the cost of living crisis. So energy prices are going up, but food prices are also rising at a fairly dramatic rate. There was a conversation earlier between Vladimir Putin and President Erdogan of Turkey talking about the Black Sea and grain shipments. Is this the next flashpoint, do you think, here, trying to figure out a way of getting Ukrainian grain, other grains, out through the Black Sea and onto world markets?
That is what Western leaders are trying to make happen. It's extremely difficult, but the reality is that at the moment, the grain that the world needs, especially developing countries, but emerging economies, wealthy countries as well, the grain that we all need is sitting in Ukrainian storage facilities and can't get out because Ukrainian ports are blocked, and it's too dangerous to ship it through the Black Sea. So Western leaders are trying to figure out, and have been trying to figure out for some time now, whether they can, for example, provide naval escorts. But at the end of the day, it's up to shipping companies whether they consider the risk acceptable. Is that possible?
Do you think that we could see naval vessels being used to escort escort ships out? We've been worried about putting a no-fly zone in and putting effectively NATO aircraft up against Russian aircraft. Presumably we'd be in a situation here where you'd be putting NATO marine vessels and Russian marine vessels, navies, in exactly the same scenario.
Very close to each other, and I wish I could say it's a workable scenario. I think it would be highly risky. It would have to be led by the US, and as you say, it would put any participating navy in very close proximity, and also at risk of some sort of accidental
clash.
Exactly, with Russian navy vessels in the Black Sea. So as much as we want that grain, I think the the prospect of a naval escort provided by the US and other countries is just very dim at the moment.
So that grain stays in Ukraine, do you think? Or do you think there's another way out? Could it come down through Turkey? Are there other exit mechanisms to get that onto world markets?
There are limited alternatives, for example, getting it out the landway or getting it out through river ports, but that's much smaller quantities we're talking about. Romania is trying to help, but of course then the grain has to get to Romania first and then out of Romanian ports. So shipping really is the lifeline of the globalized economy, and at the moment Ukraine is shut out of it.
Let's talk a little bit about NATO and its expansion. Do you think Sweden and Finland are going to join?
I think they will join. The question is whether they will receive their official invitation before the NATO summit in Madrid at the end of June. That's what everybody was hoping would happen, and in fact was assuming would happen. Then Turkey came along and delayed the whole process with its objections over, in particular, Sweden's relations with militant Kurds.
Do you think, how long could it be delayed for? Erdogan has a huge issue with the Kurds. He's also potentially going to be facing an election. That election could be pulled forward. It's a major, major problem for him at the moment. When do you think he will allow it to happen?
I think at the beginning we were all thinking this is some sort of way for him to get concessions from the United States, for example, F-35s.
Yeah.
Exactly. But now he has put specific demands to Sweden, that Sweden, for example, rescind its suspension of arms exports to Turkey, that it curtail its relations with specific Kurdish groups, and unless Sweden meets those demands, he's not going to back down. So it wasn't just a game to get F-35s. He clearly has a major grievance regarding Sweden in particular and the Kurds. So I think he can drag it out for quite a long time to get that concession, at least.
What does quite a long time mean? Is this months or is it years? Is it how long does this last for? As I said, there are elections potentially coming in Turkey.
I think at the very least until the elections, then he can drop that subject, I think, after that, because he will have other issues on the agenda that will be more urgent to Turkish voters. But it's not going to be within the next few weeks. And unfortunately, this demonstrates NATO weakness. Just at the moment when NATO looked so strong and united, this issue completely unexpectedly comes along and demonstrates that NATO is not united.
And where does that leave Erdogan, do you think, in the long run, in terms of his relations, Turkey's relations with NATO allies? At the moment, he's being seen as difficult. Is that his new role in NATO? Is that, like, the southern flank remains important and critical in some ways? NATO can't remove him, but how does the relationship change, do you think, between Turkey and the rest of NATO?
He has been seen as difficult for a long time, but I think now he's seen as practically unbearable. But he doesn't care because he knows that Turkey can't be kicked out, just like no other NATO member state can be kicked out. And as you mentioned, Turkey is vital strategically to NATO. It has played that role ever since it joined decades ago, and everybody was aware at the time that Turkey was not an ideal candidate, but they wanted it because it was it's strategically located. So I think he's relishing the role of being the difficult boy because he gets things out of it, because everybody knows that it's in their interest to keep NATO as harmonious as possible.
Elizabeth, we're going to leave it there. Interesting conversation. Thank you very much indeed. Elizabeth Broad, Resident Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Okay, we're nearly done, but we need to talk about what happens over the next 24 hours. We need to talk about what is going to be happening over a busy week. In terms of what we're going to be watching over the next 24 hours, inflation prints. Inflation across the Eurozone. We get data out tomorrow. We also get data out of the US and China. This is Bloomberg.
city of Jamnagar is a money-making machine for Asia's richest man, Mukesh Ambani. His company Reliance has the world's biggest oil refinery complex here in the city. Jamnagar is also where Ambani is making his newest bet, a $10 billion investment in green energy. His ambition is closely aligned with the Indian government's plan to reach net zero emissions by 2070. But Ambani is not alone. India's second richest man, Gautam Adani, has committed $20 billion of investment over the next decade. But India's massive dependencies on fossil fuels have some environmental advocates questioning the realism and sincerity of those green ambitions and those of its two biggest billionaires.
Crypto, you have a world of young people that want their own financial system and their own culture. And it is very powerful, and I'm a big believer in it.
This is a market that over the past few weeks has made it clear it wants to go higher. It got a little spooked by the idea that geopolitical tensions are rising.
So plenty coming up over the next 24 hours. One of the highlights I'm going to be watching out for is a meeting that I think is going to be taking place tomorrow between President Biden and Mr. Powell. I think it's going to be a fascinating conversation that these markets are certainly going to pay attention to. Today, I think in some ways, a bit of a warm-up event for tomorrow. We've got a lot of inflation data out of Europe today, but we get the headline numbers tomorrow. Euro area flash CPI inflation, French and Italian headline inflation, consumer confidence out of the US, and China PMIs. But this all comes down, I think, to the relationship between politics and monetary policy. And that meeting in the White House tomorrow, I think, is going to be fascinating. Powell and Biden. Chris Waller, remember today, has signaled that basically he wants to hike until it hurts the US economy. Is that going to be the message coming out of that meeting as well? We're going to have some great coverage lined up for tomorrow. Hope you enjoyed the show. This is Bloomberg.
The end of the year, but Bali is still quiet and empty. I am here in Kuta Legian, one of the main walking streets here that is used to be a tourist spot for beach, dining, shopping, but many shops here are still closed. Most of the outlets are either for rent or for sale as they have run out of business.
Saya kerjanya di sini udah lama, udah ada 10 tahunan di sini kerja. Masih sepi sih, nggak kayak dulu. Kalau dulu kan rame, sekarang ya ada, 1-2 itu ada. Tapi nggak kayak dulu, kalau dulu rame sekali. Sekarang paling dapat jualan ya 100, 120 gitu, 200 ya. Kalau dulu sih ya nyampe dah 1 juta, 1,5 tuh nyampe dapat jualan. Bisa sampai 2 juta dulu. Sekarang nggak pernah lagi dapat segitu. Sama aja, belum ada turis ke Bali. Masih ya domestik aja.
While Bali has reopened its borders for foreign tourists since October, they're still not coming in. Many international airlines are yet to reinstate their direct flight to the island. Balinese people here really hope they can see more people from Australia, China, and Europe to come visit next year.
Access the financial world on demand. Hear from leading economists, policymakers, and industry experts via live and on-demand webinars, only from Bloomberg. Start exploring to see what's moving the markets. Visit Bloomberg.com/webinars.
I think that it's hard to put your head around any narrative. Let's just be honest. We've had sort of a shift in, are we in some sort of stagflation fears moment? People were talking about that all day yesterday.
Alison Rose is a trailblazer. In 2019, she became the first woman to lead a major UK bank when she was named Chief Executive and Executive Director of NatWest Group, the place she stayed since starting her career as a graduate trainee 30 years ago.
It was always, for me, the next job was more interesting, the next challenge was more interesting.
Her current role is her most challenging yet, taking the helm of a lender that had to be bailed out by the state following the global financial crisis, and steering it through the multiple disruptions of the COVID pandemic, Brexit, and the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, I'm feeling okay about the future. I'm very conscious of, you know, the challenges that are facing people, but I think there is a lot of resilience in the banking sector and in the corporate world that can help.
As she looks ahead, she's determined to innovate, to embrace new technologies, and reform financial structures that have deepened inequalities.
Some of the work that we did around addressing some of these barriers has made a difference. We've seen a real increase in female entrepreneurs.
But she also tells me that she wants NatWest to get back to basics in serving customers.
I describe it as a relationship bank for a digital world. Actually, it's really important that you build a relationship because you can go anywhere, do anything. But it's much more convenient, and that's what banking should be.
Thank you so much for joining us on Leaders with LACWA. Now, you started as a trainee. Do you remember that first day?
Oh, gosh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I joined the graduate scheme, and I just remember joining with a bunch of graduates, and you did this great rotation where you tried lots of different jobs, and my abiding memory was I had no idea what I was doing. You know, banking from the outside in is really complex. And just being really nervous and not really knowing what I was going to do, and then sort of launching myself into this graduate training program, which was great fun.
And here you are as chief executive. So do you think sometimes of what kind of leader you were back then, or you thought you were back then, and what you are now?
I had no concept when I joined that I would be CEO. I was, you know, it was all about trying to learn. I really thought I'd be in banking for 2 to 3 years and then go and do something else. So, you know, I think the great thing of being a graduate and going through an organization in any career, you get to see different types of leaders. And so as you develop your own leadership style, you sort of borrow from other people, and then you find yourself. I mean, that's the whole thing about as you start a job, you kind of learn about yourself as you go and acquire different skills. So I had no idea at that point or view that I would become the CEO.
But so what made you stay?
It was always, for me, the next job was more interesting. The next challenge was more interesting. So you know, my HR team always, you know, hold their head in their hands sometimes when I say I didn't have a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan. It was, what was the next most interesting job? And it was always an interesting challenge, and it was always with great people. And I think those are 2 really important ingredients in any career or any firm. Work with great people, work with great teams, have jobs that challenge you.
What's your biggest challenge right now when you look at how you lead the team? Is it motivating people? Is it keeping the workforce on side? Or is it actually, you know, strategy and shareholders?
Yeah, I mean, all of the above, right? And I think being the CEO of any organization today, you're having to balance all of the needs of your stakeholders. I mean, I've deliberately set my strategy of being a purpose-led strategy, and it is about keeping my customers happy, my communities happy, my shareholders happy, all of my stakeholders happy. But I think the biggest challenge of any CEO or any leader right now is the world is so uncertain and moving so quickly. So you have to be able to lead through ambiguity and with authenticity. And of course, what most people want is, tell me what the answer is. And that's what we're all having to explore.
You've been chief executive for just over 2.5 years, and at the time it was really, focusing on the environment, focusing on ESG. We've had COVID since. Now we have a war at the, the footsteps of Europe. How has that changed you as chief executive?
I think it's meant that I've had to be much more hands-on. I was always, quite hands-on anyway, but I think when I took over as CEO, when I spoke to the team, I talked about creating a learning organization and how the world was changing so fast and it was very unpredictable, and we had to stay really close to our customers and be able to work with them and build a tight relationship. That's never been more important than through the pandemic or through this horrible situation we have with the invasion of Ukraine. So I think what it's really centered for me the importance of, clear leadership, clear direction, but also understanding, the balance that people have in their lives. And for me, leading, banking is a service-led organization. Stay close to your customers, support them through their lives, and make sure you drive a very clear path for your colleagues.
Do you think the reputation of banks has really changed in the last 10 years, or is it frustrating that, sometimes clients, customers see you as the app instead of understanding exactly what you're trying to achieve?
Yeah, I mean, it's always hard to get over, what a bank does and what it is. I mean, we provide, the fuel to the economy that creates jobs. We provide huge amounts of support to communities and big education programs, and we, provide banking. But banking is almost seen as a utility rather than a service, and so we're always balancing those. And I think, since the global financial crisis, banks lost trust. It takes a long time to rebuild that. So you have to do that customer by customer. But I think the reputation of banks is improving. I think we stood up during the pandemic and we were there to support customers and were part of helping keeping the economy going. And hopefully the value of the banking sector became clearer.
The government now owns less than 50% of NatWest. How did that feel on that day?
It was a good milestone. It was a really important milestone, especially for colleagues. When I took over, the government held 64%. I mean, they've been a great shareholder, but getting below 50%, no longer majority owned, is just, a testament that we're delivering the right strategy and delivering value. But I think for a lot of colleagues, it was a milestone moment. Day to day made no difference. I think we had a gentle nod to say excellent, and then on with the job. There's still 48% to go.
Coming up, Alison Rose tells me she believes the UK economy is making a strong recovery from the pandemic. But NatWest customers are still adjusting.
With rising interest rates, with inflation, those are things that, peoples and families and businesses haven't had to deal with for 10 years. So a lot of business owners today haven't had to operate in that environment. So it is causing quite a lot of anxiety.
Lots happening on Wall Street.
It's the basic law of economics.
It validated what the market was already pricing.
Need to catch up?
This is Bloomberg Wall Street Week. I'm David Weston.
We've got the information and insights.
David, you just hit the nail right on the head.
From businesses most influential and instrumental.
And that's the way you run good risk management.
It's a challenging dynamic.
We could continue to see that kind of strength.
Bloomberg Wall Street Week premieres Friday with replays all weekend on Bloomberg Television and Radio. Front Row, exclusive interviews with the most influential figures in finance. Lloyd Blankfein.
Deflation is a terrible thing. Inflation you could tolerate.
Kathy Wood.
Tesla will be in the pole position to dominate.
Jeremy Grantham.
We've had a very, very abnormal honeymoon Goldilocks period.
First available on the Bloomberg Terminal, then on Bloomberg Television and Bloomberg.com. Front Row, the best seats in the house for business's greatest minds.
Rose has spent her entire career in finance and at West, starting as a graduate trainee straight out of Durham University 30 years ago. She became chief executive in 2019. Now, as the UK recovers from the pandemic, she's been taking the temperature of the bank's customer base as inflation, rising fuel prices, and conflict in Ukraine cloud the economic outlook. We discuss what she's observing on the ground.
We overlook, St. Paul's and the City of London. You're so intricately, intimately linked to the future of the UK. What are you seeing when you go to branches and in the country?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of anxiety at the moment. I think the recovery from the pandemic has been and is continuing to be very strong. So I think we're seeing the economy recover. But with rising interest rates, with inflation, those are things that peoples and families and businesses haven't had to deal with for 10 years. So a lot of business owners today haven't had to operate in that environment. So it is causing quite a lot of anxiety, which means for us, because we're up and down the country in branches and offices, we can spend a lot of time talking to businesses and helping them plan and deal with it. But it's very different, and it's not something people have had to operate in for a long time.
Do you feel more stress than at the beginning of COVID? It's very different. I mean, some customers will be able to pass on, of course, some of this inflation onwards, but then you'll have, a lot of families going through quite a lot.
Yeah, it's very different, and I think it's the experience is very different everywhere. At the moment, we're not seeing signs of stress in what we would see in our data around distress or loans or people asking for requests for help. So it's mainly concerns. But with fuel price rising, for the lower income families, it is quite distressing. At the other end of the scale, you've got a huge amount of liquidity sitting in the economy, on corporate balance sheets, in businesses, from all the quantitative easing that's been done. So you've got a number of things, pulling against each other, which makes it very complex. So I think it's really an important time actually for banks, again, to be really important because we can provide practical help and support to people.
So what kind of questions do you get?
I mean, it varies. We get a lot of questions from business owners about how they manage disruption to supply chain, how they can fund their working capital, how they can restructure their pricing mechanisms for families. It's how can they save money, in terms of the money they're spending to afford the increase in fuel prices that are coming. And we do something called a financial health check, where invariably we can save people money by bringing their finances together. So it's that proactive conversation.
What about mortgages? What are you seeing in mortgages? And if mortgages go up, do you worry about some kind of credit crunch or people not being able to pay that?
Well, mortgages are, again, this is a sort of counterfactual. The mortgage market continues to remain very strong. Demand for mortgages remains very strong. And for us, the majority of our mortgages are on fixed rate mortgages. So the interest rate rises are not causing an immediate problem. Same with businesses, actually. 50% of our small businesses are on fixed rate borrowing. So you're not getting increases coming through.
For now, but then in 1 or 2 years, I guess that stops, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think as you come off the fixed rate, what will the rates be at that point? I think it's about helping people plan and think ahead. What is going to happen in 2 years' time? Where will inflation be? The Bank of England are putting through interest rate rises to try and bring inflation down. The invasion of Ukraine and the disruption to the geopolitical environment is causing stress. So I think it's calm heads are needed right now to navigate what is uncertainty and making sure that businesses and families have got the right support.
Worst case scenario, could you see zombie companies or companies going under? Or because we've had that support during COVID, we seem to be a bit more resilient to what's coming?
I think there's a lot more resilience. I mean, what is astounding, if you look at how businesses in the UK performed during COVID, I don't think anyone would have predicted they would have been so resilient. And yes, there was a lot of support put in place to do that. But, businesses did think about what was their supply chain like. They did think about, innovation and technology. They did think about how they managed their workforce in a different way. So there is a lot of resilience.
So does it mean you're feeling okay about the future?
Yeah, I'm feeling okay about the future. I'm very conscious of, the challenges that are facing people. But I think there is a lot of resilience in the banking sector and in the corporate world that can help. There is a bit of a buffer there that can support. So I think we just need to navigate that, and hopefully inflation will settle down. I do think things are exacerbated right now because of the invasion of Ukraine and what that's doing to supply chains and the geopolitical impacts. But I think it's just really important to try and give good advice, sensible advice, and plan sensibly.
So when you travel across the country, it's also extremely interesting to hear your thoughts on, of course, some of these regions and how different they are. We talk a lot about leveling up. Has it worked out in the UK?
Yeah, well, I mean, we as a bank are a really regional bank. Most of our business is outside of London. And one of the things I would say is the economies outside of London are very different. There are different concentrations. We've seen great growth, for example, in technology in the north. We have huge teams in Manchester where there's a real hub of technology and innovation. We have innovation and accelerator hubs up and down the country. And so you are seeing different growth, but there are different communities that need a bit more support and a bit more levelling up. And actually the green agenda, the climate agenda, is a real opportunity to create that, because it's going to contribute to new jobs, more jobs. Actually, the flexibility created from the pandemic, working from home, means you can create and hire people around the country. So I think there's a real opportunity, but I think it's really important that everybody recognises the different economies and the different trends that are.
Why is it still so difficult for women entrepreneurs to find funding?
Yeah, I mean, it's a complex question, and it's really frustrating because there are so many female entrepreneurs in the UK. Lots of reasons. Lack of access and awareness of financing is definitely one. A very shockingly small amount of VC money goes to female entrepreneurs. It's only 1%. We think it's gone up to 5% as a result of, but that's still shocking. It's shocking. And it's mainly investment teams are all male. They'd say they're not seeing the pipeline, but we're seeing amazing entrepreneurs. Some of the work that we did around addressing some of these barriers has made a difference. We've seen a real increase in female entrepreneurs. The number of businesses opened and run by women last year went up by 33%. So 156,000 new businesses opened by women. And really excitingly, the biggest growth area was in the 16 to 24-year-old age group. But it's still too hard because it's geared to perceptions of what a business leader should be, what an entrepreneur needs to be successful, and yet you have this amazing group of female entrepreneurs. So it's moving, but not fast enough.
Does it change the working from home because of the pandemic? Does it change, does it help or actually hinder women?
Well, I think in the short term it hindered, because what we saw, unfortunately, is one of the big barriers to female entrepreneurs is family care responsibilities disproportionately fall on their shoulders. And during the pandemic, with working from home, that became exacerbated. And we found that 70% of female entrepreneurs found running their business in the pandemic more stressful than men. It was only 55%. And for women, they had to take 6 out of 10 days for caring responsibilities versus men, 1 out of 10. So it made it worse. However, the fact that networking could be delivered digitally online and it wasn't in a very old traditional way, the fact that you could bring teams together and work remotely is definitely an advantage. So as we come out of the pandemic with those family care responsibilities diminished, then I think the digital and technology will help, which is why we've seen this big increase and more direct, practical help for female entrepreneurs.
Did you feel any of those pressures during the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I was running a bank from my office at home, and both my children were at home and not at school. My daughter was going through her A-levels. My son was doing online learning. So, it's definitely a challenge. My husband was brilliant. We shared it, but it is a different dimension of stress that you feel.
Coming up, Alison Rose talks fintech, crypto, and explains why banks have to focus on relationships to stay relevant in a rapidly changing world.
Banks have no reason to exist unless our customers want us to exist. We provide capital and fuel to the economy, but we need to make sure we're serving them and working with them.
Bloomberg has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it. Now, can simply type phrases in everyday English in the command line. Compare financials. Find people. Analyze markets. You can enter phrases or ask questions. What do you want to know today? Ask a question or visit SearchGo to find answers now. Access the financial world on demand. Hear from leading economists, policymakers, and industry experts via live and on-demand webinars, only from Bloomberg. Start exploring to see what's moving the markets. Visit Bloomberg.com/webinars.
As the first woman to head a major UK bank, Alison Rose is a living example of one way that finance is changing and evolving in the 21st century. The industry is also transforming through technology, with physical branches increasingly giving way to digital interactions. We discussed what this shift means to the business of banking.
How has the relationship between a customer and the banker actually changed? I remember like 15, 20 years ago, people would go into branches and have this like personal relationship. Now you're spending so much money on the app because a lot of people don't need to speak to someone. Yeah. So how do you reconcile the two?
Yeah, I mean, banking's changed massively. I mean, what I'm trying to do with my strategy for the bank is I describe it as a relationship bank for a digital world, because it is a relationship. You have to have a relationship, but a relationship can be delivered in a very different way. For example, NatWest now, 60% of our retail customers only deal with us digitally. We are a digital bank. Yeah. 90% of their transactions can be done digitally and online. So the way banking happens is changing. The mobile app, video banking. Now, that before the pandemic, we do 100 a week. We're now doing 16 to 17,000, and it's much more convenient. So I think it is the sign of how technology is evolving, how customer behavior is evolving, and it is much more interactive. So actually, it's really important that you build a relationship, because you can go anywhere, do anything, but it's much more convenient, and that's what banking should be.
How do you measure success? Is it a customer that will have every product with you? The number of products or a number of good reviews?
It varies. I mean, we measure it through NPS, so that we make sure, which is our customer satisfaction scores. We measure it through meeting the needs of our customers through their life cycle. So it's great that we have grown our market share with youth customers up to almost 16% now. But what success for me will be in 20 years' time, those young customers will be existing customers of the bank, and we'll be helping them with their house, we'll be helping them invest for the future, we'll be doing all the things that really matter. So we look at it as part of our purpose strategy to build long-term value, so our customers stay with us and grow with us.
Any M&A on the horizon? I mean, there's always rumors flying around that you're either buying someone big or you're being bought.
Yeah. No, I mean, one of the advantages I have now with the bank is, we have, lots of capital. We've got a capital generative business. We're investing $3 billion. We're paying very substantial dividends, and we have capital to invest in M&A if there are compelling reasons. But for me, there's got to be really compelling reasons why I would like to acquire, because we're on a path of a great transformation plan. Things that we're building ourselves, partnering is a really important aspect of what I want to do. So I will look at M&A, but only if it makes really strong, compelling sense for shareholders.
How do you see the banking sector actually changing in the UK in the next 5 years?
Yeah, look, I think we've got to be, it's much more open architecture. Technology and data is really transforming not just how customers work, but how we work. And I am a great believer in bringing partners in. I'm building a real partnership strategy, because, doesn't always make sense for me to build it myself. And also, I think the definition of place is changing. You can't rely on customers to come to you. Our customers are, you know, in the metaverse. They're, you know, in TikTok. They're somewhere else. So we've got to build the relationship and go where they are. So I think partnership, technology, data are all going to be part of it. But we're an intrinsic part of people's lives, and that's a very privileged place to be. We just need to make sure we stay there.
In the metaverse, is it to have a presence? Is it actually attracting customers in the metaverse?
Not yet, but I think, you know, clearly the boundaries between the virtual world and the real world are very different. And a lot of our younger customers move very effortlessly between different places. So we need to make sure we stay relevant. I mean, banks have no reason to exist unless our customers want us to exist. We provide capital and fuel to the economy, but we need to make sure we're serving them and working with them.
What does it mean for crypto and fraud?
Yeah, I mean, crypto is a real challenge. It's a new technology, but it's also, we're seeing very significant amounts of fraud coming through that. And fraud generally in the UK is, you know, we've talked about it being almost, you know, pandemic proportions, because people are, you know, being defrauded constantly. I mean, last year we stopped over 355 million of fraud against our customers. I mean,
online?
It is through a mixture of online, through romance scandals, through very simple impersonation scandals. And so making sure we can protect our customers and inform and educate them is really important. And crypto is a new innovation, a new technology, a new currency, still developing, but there are quite a lot, and there has been a high proportion of investment frauds using crypto. So we're working really hard to develop defenses against that to keep people safe.
Rapid fire questions. Okay. Best piece of advice?
Don't sweat the small stuff.
The worst piece of advice you've ever been given?
Worst piece? Try and be like someone else.
What would you tell your 20-year-old self?
Go for it and believe in yourself, and just be yourself.
Who's someone that you admire?
My late father.
Because?
He was high integrity, very courageous, and believed in me, and was a good man.
What does it mean being an entrepreneur in the UK in 2022?
Being an entrepreneur is taking a risk and having all of the opportunity. This is the most entrepreneurial country there is, and the opportunity to start a business and grow and thrive is really exciting. But it's about having an idea and going for it.
You're so good. I have like 25 other rapid fire questions. Where's Alison Rose in 5 years from now?
Doing something I love.
Which is?
Whatever the next challenge is.
Alison, for the next 12 months, what's your biggest priority?
To help people, families, and business navigate the uncertainty ahead.
Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Lots happening on Wall Street.
It's the basic law of economics.
It validated what the market was already pricing.
Need to catch up?
This is Bloomberg Wall Street Week. I'm David Weston.
We've got the information and insights.
David, you just hit the nail right on the head.
From businesses most influential and instrumental.
And that's the way you run good risk management.
It's a challenging dynamic.
We could continue to see that kind of strength.
Bloomberg Wall Street Week premieres Friday with replays all weekend on Bloomberg Television and Radio. Front Row, exclusive interviews with the most influential figures in finance. Lloyd Blankfein.
Deflation is a terrible thing. Inflation you could tolerate.
Kathy Wood.
Tesla will be in the pole position to dominate.
Jeremy Grantham.
We've had a very, very abnormal honeymoon Goldilocks period.
First available on the Bloomberg Terminal, then on Bloomberg Television and Bloomberg.com. Front Row, the best seats in the house for business's greatest minds.
Bloomberg has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it. Now, you can simply type phrases in everyday English in the command line. Compare financials. Find people. Analyze markets. You can enter phrases or ask questions. What do you want to know today? Ask a question or visit SearchGo to find answers now. Access the financial world on demand. Hear from leading economists, policymakers, and industry experts via live and on-demand webinars, only from Bloomberg. Start exploring to see what's moving the markets. Visit Bloomberg.com/webinars.
Indra Nooyi is one of the world's leading business executives. She reached the pinnacle of U.S. enterprise as CEO of American food and drinks giant PepsiCo for 12 years.
I had a loyal set of people that followed me because they just thought they became better leaders, better executives, better people after they'd worked with me.
She's been named among the most powerful people on the planet. And she brings a unique insight into the challenges of achieving equality on Wall Street.
There's nobody like me. A colored woman, immigrant from an emerging market. So there was always this feeling that I was so different from the others and I had to earn a place at the table.
She now sits on the boards of companies including Amazon and Philips and has written a book reflecting on her remarkable career, My Life in Full.
I had my fair share of critics, but that's okay. But over time, it went from, oh my God, what the hell is Indra doing, to, God, Indra is so prescient, to Indra was so ahead of everybody else on performance and purpose. So I feel like I've been vindicated.
Indra Nooyi, thank you so much for speaking to us on Leaders with LACWA. You've had such an incredible career. What did you learn about being a woman in power?
Well, it was lonely in the early days, so I didn't look at myself as a woman in power. I just looked at myself as this alien being that showed up in corporate America because there was nobody like me, a colored woman, immigrant from an emerging market. So there was always this feeling that I was so different from the others and I had to earn a place at the table. Though that was the early days. But as the years progressed and we got into the 2020s, things started to get better. 2018, 2019, things started to get better. I would say it wasn't easy. It was lonely, it was tough, and it was hard work.
But Indra, did you ever doubt yourself? So when you say, I was like an alien, just trying to keep up almost, did you ever think, actually, this is too hard, this is unjust, this is unfair?
I didn't think that. I said, oh my God, how am I going to hold on? What do I need to do to prove that I deserve a seat at this table? How do I contribute? How do I make myself be heard? How do I deliver something that's way better than what everybody else has so that people look at me and go, she's the real thing? And so I was actually driven to perform. I was driven to prove myself, and I was just driven to learn and expand my own thinking. So I took upon it as a challenge and an adventure to do well in this environment.
Have you met many men that actually also felt they needed to prove that they, had a seat at the table?
Maybe, but I think men, because the brotherhood is so strong, they don't have to talk about their fears and their concerns, because if they do, they talk amongst themselves, and I never hear about it. In my case, I felt it, I lived it, and so I can talk about it in the first person. Most of the guys I know, sort of say, yeah, the job is tough, it's a new job, but I'll make it happen. Or they'll chat with their guy friends, and somehow the brotherhood gives them a hand. In a way, the brotherhood gave me a hand too, Francine. I should tell you that all the mentors who pulled me and supported me and coached me and developed me were all white men, and they were phenomenal in terms of how much they invested in my career.
What I hear, almost day in, day out by women in powerful positions is that you have to be the best if you're going to make it. You have to be better than any man. How do we achieve true equality?
In those days, I'd say, remember, I started my corporate career here in 1980. So I'd say between 1980 and about 2007, 8, 10, that period, I would say that women had to be way better than men to be taken seriously. I think as more women have come into the workforce and they're beginning to really thrive and show their true worth, I think that now people are looking at women as a serious force in corporate America who can actually drive the agenda forward. But in the early days, we were so new that people kept, I thought people were wondering why we were there at the table at all. Maybe they were not, but this was just my own perception because, you know, I would read body language, I would do whatever. This is just me, maybe imagining things. I just say, God, they haven't accepted me as yet.
When did you feel accepted? Was there a day where you thought, actually, I can be myself and people will listen?
There were times when, you know, where the turning point happened where in a meeting, the CEO would look at everybody, hear everybody's point of view, and then say, let's stop and see what Indra has to say, because she usually has a way of capturing what needs to be done and telling us, you know, what the next step should be. So then I realized maybe I have something to bring to the table, demystifying the complex, giving people a clear path forward. And I think those many mentors I had along the way, Francine, actually helped me build my confidence by making statements like this. Let's hear what Indra has to say. Indra, you've been unusually quiet. Don't you want to say something? Because you usually have great things to say. So by giving me these tailwinds, they helped me build my confidence. And over time, I realized that, you know, I deserve a seat at the table, and maybe I have something to contribute here.
Yeah, well, you definitely did. So what do you think are your leadership qualities? And actually, do we ask different leadership qualities now than we did 20 years ago?
Actually, two different answers. I think that I succeeded over the years, one, because I based my entire leadership on competence. I spent a lot of time making sure the business, the topic I was working on, I had mastery of. Enough mastery to understand what we needed to do, how we needed to adapt whatever solution, and then adopt it inside the company. I had the ability to zoom out and look at issues in a broad way, and then zoom in and implement them. So this is something that I was known for. And people will always say I had enormous strategic acuity because I could connect seemingly unconnected dots and make a shape out of it. So these were one set of skills that people would say, look, if you need this sort of a skill, go to Indra. On the personal side, I loved people. So I would reach out to everybody from senior executives down to the front line. I showed tremendous empathy. I cared about people. And people loved to work for me. And they would say, what Indra does is raise the bar for us, but she helps us get there. She mentors, she develops, she coaches. And I had a loyal set of people that followed me because they just thought they became better leaders, better executives, better people after they'd worked with me for a few years.
Do you think, Indra, that self-doubt is more of a feminine trait than you see in men?
I think women talk about it, men may not talk about it, they may have it, but a lot of women I know do have self-doubt. And I think it's because people don't give them that boost of confidence they need, explicit boost of confidence. As I told you in my case, some of my bosses gave me that explicit boost of confidence. And I think we ought to find people who tell a woman, look, that was a great job you did, or that presentation was outstanding. I think we have to get more people, either promoters of women or people in the sisterhood who give women that confidence, explicit confidence, which is still lacking. It's happening now little by little, but it's still lacking.
Coming up, Indra Nooyi on the challenges of raising children while leading one of the world's most valuable companies.
When your kid writes you this note saying, Mom, please come home. If you come home, I love you more. Please, please, please. You just sit there and cry.
lot's happening on Wall Street.
It's the basic law of economics.
It validated what the market was already pricing.
Need to catch up?
This is Bloomberg Wall Street Week. I'm David Weston.
We've got the information and insights
David, you just hit the nail right on the head.
from businesses most influential and instrumental.
And that's the way you run good risk management.
It's a challenging dynamic.
We could continue to see that kind of strength.
Bloomberg Wall Street Week premieres Friday with replays all weekend on Bloomberg Television and Radio. Front Row, exclusive interviews with the most influential figures in finance. Lloyd Blankfein,
Deflation is a terrible thing. Inflation you could tolerate.
Kathy Wood,
Tesla will be in the pole position to dominate.
Jeremy Grantham.
We've had a very, very abnormal honeymoon Goldilocks period.
First available on the Bloomberg Terminal, then on Bloomberg Television and Bloomberg.com. Front Row, the best seats in the house for business's greatest minds.
Indra Nooyi is one of the world's most admired business leaders, but her punishing work life meant sacrifices at home. We discuss empowering employees and the challenges she faced as a woman and a mother at the top of corporate America.
Do we need even more nurturing post-pandemic? Is the way that we talk with employees going to change?
I think talent becomes the single biggest differentiator of a successful entity versus an unsuccessful entity. So you've got to do everything possible to hire, train, retain, put your arms around talent. I mean, you really got to focus on your talent. In the past, it's always been give them money, show them that they have an upward mobility and can make even more money, and that's the only reason people come to work. I think post-pandemic, we're seeing more and more people say, I have to worry about me as a person. I have to worry about my family. I want to worry about my well-being, my mental health. So we've got to start encompassing people as holistic humans as opposed to a tool of the trade, which means that we have to engage with them head, heart, and hands, not just head and hands. The heart has to be engaged. So we have to show more empathy, show that we care, that they're citizens of the community, they're members of a family, and all of those have to come into consideration as we help an executive or an employee be an employee and be a person of the community and the family. The stakes are higher.
Indra, how many leaders do you think are thinking like that right now? Is there anyone in the business world today that you admire?
Well, I don't see too many CEOs, but the people I read about, people like Mark Benioff were doing this all the time. I even look at people at Amazon, whose board I sit on. They do care about employee well-being, and a lot of people are working flexibly. And they say, hey, that's what it takes to keep the employee happy in a world where talent is in short supply. Let's do that. I was talking to somebody from Stripe the other day, the company that, is still private. But, she's working out in New York, the company's in California. But the fact of the matter is, they said, as long as you can do the job, and as long as you can interact with the executives now and then, we care about you because you have a kid in school, your family is in New York, go ahead and stay there. So I think people are now waking up and saying, if I lose this employee because I don't give him or her the flexibility, I'm not going to be able to hire somebody very easily to replace them of this caliber. So let me start with the talent I need, not combine the talent and location at the same time, which is what we did in the past.
Yeah. I enjoyed your book. I actually really loved it. And in it, Indra, you talk about, juggling work-life balance, juggling kids, even being sent, I think, by your mother to get a pint of milk because you had nothing at home and you'd just been nominated chief executive. What are you like as a mother?
Let me give you my perspective. I'll give you my kids' perspective next. I think I'm a very, very loving, very involved mother. And if my kids need me, I will drop everything and go to them. Okay. If they're hurt just a little bit, I'm the most doting mother, and I will just smother my kids with love and affection. And they know that. On the other hand, As with all kids whose mothers worked, they wished mom was there full time during their childhood years. Even though had I been there full time, they'd have said, God, she's hovering over us. Because I've seen a lot of kids who had stay-at-home mothers who said, I wish my mother would work like you. So I think they like it both ways. Work, but be there on demand for us. Today they would say, mom has high standards, but mom is loving, loving, loving. In fact, she's a bit smothering. And only recently have I learned to let go a little bit. In the past, if my kids don't text me 3 times a day, I'd go nuts. Now I'm saying, they must be all right. So let me not, hover over them too much. So I'm trying to let go the last 2 or 3 years. And kids are liking it. But I would say on balance, I'm a good mom.
Have you never not felt mom guilt? And
all the time. Felt mom guilt all the time.
But why? Is it society?
No, when your kid writes you this note saying, Mom, please come home. If you come home, I love you more. Please, please, please. You just sit there and cry. Or when you come home from a trip at 10 o'clock in the night and, there's no smartphone, so you haven't been able to text and talk to your daughter. And she says, Mom, I had something so important to tell you. I waited at the door till 10 o'clock and then I went to bed. And I only came home at 11 because the flight was delayed. Those times you feel like your heart is being cut open and wrenched from you. So you sit there and have a good cry that, am I doing the right thing? But then, you've got to think ahead and say, if you were not doing this, would you feel a different sort of a rage or regret? The answer is yes. I think all trade-offs have got sadness and regrets and rage associated with it when you pick one path versus the other. So the challenge is to try to do both. It's a tremendous cost for you personally, but if you can somehow pull it off, live with the consequences.
And your husband has been, I think, by reading your book, your biggest champion in this.
He's been a rock.
What happens if you don't have a supportive partner?
That is a challenge. And this is why I wrote this book, because not everybody has a supportive partner. Not everybody has multi-generational families helping them out. And, there's a book written by a sociologist, Eric Kleinenberg, called Palaces for the People, that profoundly impacted me because he talks about community centers, little towns with barber shops, libraries, civic centers, where community connections are built. And this is where families have to go to get support. And I honestly believe we have to rebuild trust in communities. We all have to come together to help each other out because the nature of the family has changed. Even if it didn't change because people did it by choice, some families are messy, families break up for all kinds of reasons. And very often the woman is left with the children and the entire responsibility of going out, getting a job and a paycheck and taking care of the children. That's an enormous burden. And I think it's very important that as communities, we come together and start to provide support to each other to say, hey, how can I help you in your time of need so you can help me in my time of need? And everybody get together and somehow make it happen. Again, families have to be at the center. Families are successful only if communities come together. So we have to anchor families and communities and talk about them differently, including how we build communities, how we build inner cities. All of this has to be rethought.
But this goes really to the fabric of society, and it's difficult. Cultures are different, regions are different, families are different. So how do you make sure that people feel anchored and supported in such a way?
Loneliness is a common trait. Doesn't matter which culture or which country or whatever. Loneliness is a common trait. Need for human connection is a common need across the world. As long as it's a human being, everybody wants human connection. We are building a society of young people who interact just with technology and think that's the world. So somehow or the other, we have to make it as aspirational for the young people to go out and interact with people, older people, multi-generational people, so that their life is richer for interacting in a human way with those people, as opposed to avatars of those people on screen. And making the screen so much more aspirational that you think that dealing with 3D figures and putting on your AR or VR glasses is the entire world. I worry about a world that is all technology driven and loses the human side of it. So I hope as we think about the advancement of technology, we worry a lot about what we're going to do about loneliness, human connections, taking care of multi-generations, and creating a better society and a better population.
But Indra, whose job is it to worry about it? So if you look at the metaverse, which is what you're describing, do I, as a mother, as a parent, limit the screen time for my kids, or is it regulation from the government? Is there, is it private companies? Like, how do you deal with that?
When we start talking about regulation, everybody's haunches get up. I'm not talking about regulation because then you don't know where this stops. I think if you recreate family, connections, if you recreate community connections, you have to make it aspirational for young people to leave the technology and get out. It's not mandating screen time because if you're not there, they can easily break those mandates, especially if they're in the middle of the game and they don't want to stop. So it's very hard to enforce it, and very hard to enforce it for teenage kids. I think the best thing you can do is create community activities where people have to interact and create a real desire on the part of the young people to want to go out and interact with those people. I mean, my daughter, several years ago, my older daughter, I asked her, what would you like for your birthday? And she looked at me and she said, can you stop the internet for 1 week? So what do you mean? She said, yeah, just shut down the global internet for 1 week. So we never have to interact with technology, but we just interact with people. I think young people would like to interact with people too. And so it's the challenge we all have, just as all the tech companies advance technology so much to make us want to interact with technology so much. I think we have to figure out who's going to make other activities aspirational so people want to get out of the technology and go into human connections.
Coming up, the best and worst advice Indra Nooyi has ever received. Plus, her proudest achievement from her time in charge of PepsiCo.
I had my fair share of critics, but that's okay. But over time, it went from, oh my God, what the hell is Indra doing, to, God, Indra is so prescient, to Indra was so ahead of everybody else on performance with purpose. So I feel like I've been vindicated.
Bloomberg has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it. Now, you can simply type phrases in everyday English in the command line. Compare financials. Find people. Analyze markets. You can enter phrases or ask questions. What do you want to know today? Ask a question or visit SearchGo to find answers now. Access the financial world on demand. Hear from leading economists, policymakers, and industry experts via live and on-demand webinars, only from Bloomberg. Start exploring to see what's moving the markets. Visit Bloomberg.com/webinars.
Indra Nooyi led American food and drinks giant PepsiCo for 12 years, overseeing a drive for healthier products and greater sustainability. We discuss her proudest achievement, as well as the best and worst advice she's ever received.
Indra, what are you most proud of as your time as chief executive?
Performance with purpose. I think I was way ahead of my time, but I think that was the right direction for PepsiCo. It was the right direction for industry. And, each one should interpret purpose as it's relevant to their business. I think with ESG metrics now, it's almost validating performance with purpose. With too many metrics, I would argue, but it's validating performance with purpose. And I feel proud about it. When I first put it in, I mean, I had my fair share of critics, but that's okay. But over time, it went from, oh my God, what the hell is Indra doing, to, God, Indra is so prescient, to Indra was so ahead of everybody else on performance with purpose. So I feel like I've been vindicated. And I think that's what I feel most gratified about my time in PepsiCo about.
How many job offers do you get a day?
I don't know about job offers. I get requests to be on boards, advisory boards, boards of SPACs. I get maybe, I wouldn't say per day, but on a week, I may get 5 or 10. My dance card is full at this point, Francie.
And Indra, you wouldn't want another big job at a big company to make a difference once again?
I'm making a difference in everything I'm doing right now. I mean, between Amazon, Philips, MIT, Memorial Sloan Kettering, teaching up at West Point. As I said, my dance card is full, and I feel like I'm contributing enormously now, working on the care equation.
Yeah.
So I don't have a single minute available to do anything else.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever received, and what's the worst piece of advice you've ever received?
I think the best, which I got from my grandfather as a kid, and I've carried it through, is you've got to remain a lifelong student. You've got to engage in lifelong learning, because the day you stop doing that, you're going to atrophy. Sometimes I'd say, no, once I finish college, I'm done with learning. But I realized that if I don't keep learning, somehow I feel like the world is just running ahead of me, and I don't know what world I'm in. So for everybody, I'd say lifelong learning is critically important. The worst piece of advice also came from my grandfather. He'd always say, Satan has worked for idle hands. It's actually, I think, a biblical saying, but he would quote that to me all the time. And so I felt the urge to always be doing something, read something, engage in some activity, go clean, go organize. I find it impossible to just sit and do nothing. Sometimes I say, God, I'm exhausted. I want to sit and meditate or do something. But when I start my meditation, I go, nah, it's too much time, downtime for the brain. I better get back to doing something. So this wise man gave me 2 pieces of advice, which might have been timely then, but one stood me in good stead for decades, and the other one has wired me so differently, I wish I could unwire myself.
That's brilliant. Indra Nooyi, thank you so much for being with us today.
Francine, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure chatting with you.
Whether you get your news on TV, on the radio,
On Bloomberg Radio.
on the web, on the Bloomberg Terminal, or the Bloomberg apps, the news that affects your business
To recap the headlines.
You do not want to miss this
How
story.
are you thinking about those dynamics?
is our business. Bloomberg TV and radio. The world is listening. Lots happening on Wall Street.
It's the basic law of economics.
It validated what the market was already pricing.
Need to catch up?
This is Bloomberg Wall Street Week. I'm David Weston.
We've got the information and insights
David, you just hit the nail right on the head.
from business's most influential and instrumental.
And that's the way you run good risk management.
It's a challenging dynamic.
We could continue to see that kind of strength.
Bloomberg Wall Street Week premieres Friday with replays all weekend on Bloomberg Television and Radio. Front Row, exclusive interviews with the most influential figures in finance. Lloyd Blankfein,
Deflation is a terrible thing. Inflation you could tolerate.
Kathy Wood,
Tesla will be in the pole position to dominate.
Jeremy Grantham.
We've had a very, very abnormal honeymoon Goldilocks period.
First available on the Bloomberg Terminal, then on Bloomberg Television and Bloomberg.com. Front Row, the best seats in the house for business's greatest minds.
Bloomberg has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it. Now, you can simply type phrases in everyday English in the command line. Compare financials. Find people. Analyze markets. You can enter phrases or ask questions. What do you want to know today? Ask a question or visit SearchGo to find answers now. Access the financial world on demand. Hear from leading economists, policymakers, and industry experts via live and on-demand webinars, only from Bloomberg. Start exploring to see what's moving the markets. Visit Bloomberg.com/webinars.
Thomas Pesquet has spent more than a year of his life in space. As a European Space Agency astronaut, he's captured the hearts and minds of people on the continent with his updates on life from the International Space Station.
I had kind of in the back of my head a list of things that could go wrong, because there's so many things that could go wrong. It's like a series of miracles to get you to space.
Thomas Pesquet is a former Air France pilot who spent years training to blast off from Earth. He now has a unique insight into the role that space exploration can play in facing our most pressing challenges back here on Earth.
We became conscious of, our planet by going to space, and I think it's a really fair statement. It's by taking a step back with satellites that we managed to realize that our planet was much smaller than we thought.
Now, back here on Earth, he joins us to discuss readjusting to gravity, the billionaire space race, and the future of space exploration.
Now it's time to go one step further, go back to the moon with a more sustained human presence, go to Mars, and I think the society is going to follow in our footsteps.
Thomas Pesquet, thank you so much for joining us on Leaders with Lacqua. So how was it readjusting to life back on Earth?
It is challenging. I'm not going to lie. It's both psychologically and physically. I mean, psychologically, you haven't seen that many people. You've been isolated for a long time. You haven't had that many social interactions, so you have to get used to life on Earth again. And physically, your body has lost some muscle mass, has lost some bone mass. You've lost some strength. You've lost some balance because you've adapted to the conditions of spaceflight. So you have to readapt. We have a whole team here helping us out, but it takes a few weeks to get back to your level, your status from before flight.
You were in space actually for 6 months each time. So in total, it's about 396 days. What do you, now that you're on Earth, miss about space the most?
Yeah, it's a lot of time, and there's a few things. I think there's three main things I miss about being in space. The first one is obviously the floating. It's like having superpowers when you dream about flying when you're a kid. That's exactly what we're doing on the space station. We fly, we float every day. You can move around like really heavy loads with the touch of one finger. So it's like you're a superhero. So I've lost my superpowers now, and obviously I miss them. The second thing is, I think, the view of the Earth or of the cosmos, but mostly we're looking down at the Earth, and it's unbelievable to see the variety and the beauty that our planet has to offer. And we're getting a front seat for that from the International Space Station. And the last, but maybe not the least, is the sense of being on a mission, on an expedition, when everybody has the same goal. When you get up in the morning, everybody's sharp. There's just one priority, is to get the mission done. And that's very, very, I think I've enjoyed it very much. It's hard to find that much of a enthusiasm, of a sense of a mission when you're on the ground.
You talk about your younger self. Did you always want to be an astronaut?
I wanted to when I was a kid, but it was very naive at the time. I had no idea how to become an astronaut. There's no straight path to becoming an astronaut. There's no astronaut school. There's no exam that you can pass that's going to make you become an astronaut. So you have to build your career, by blocks. You have to studies. More often than not, it's science, engineering, math, or medical studies and things like that. And then I became an engineer in aerospace. I became a pilot. And then when the time came for the selection, the astronaut selection, I was lucky to be the right place at the right time. We're doing one selection every 10 to 15 years in Europe. That's not very frequent. So there's a bit of luck involved. But yeah, I was lucky enough to be able to start the race. And then at the end of the race, there was myself and 5 other colleagues becoming astronauts. So that was a highlight for sure.
And you're also a former Air France pilot. So what kind of leadership skills do you need in space that are maybe different actually from what you need here on Earth, or are similar?
I think there's a lot of, we've thought a lot about the type of flying we do now. I mean, nowadays we're flying for 6 months to the International Space Station. Tomorrow it could be for 900 days for even deeper mission into deeper space. So it's not the same skills as what you need for a short expedition. It's like comparing a marathon to a sprint. So today I think that the psychological aspect is very important. You need to be able to withstand the stress. You need to be able to communicate. You need to be able to lead, but also to follow when you have to. You need to be able to get along with people, because you don't choose your colleagues. I mean, everybody's great, but you don't get to choose who you go to space with, and you're going to be stuck in a space station for 6 months with those people. So you have to have the skills, psychological skills mostly, to be able to resist to the stress that this situation induces.
What do you enjoy the most actually in some of the experiments or some of the studies that you do when in space? I know some of the things that you study is, for example, how humans behave in space, or how your mass body and things like that. Is there anything else that you think we need to focus on much more in the next couple of decades?
I think there's so first of all, it's a ton of fun being on the ISS, because every day you're doing something different. Like you said, we have a lot of different science experiments. I think we've carried out more than 200 in 6 months for our expedition with my crewmates, which is a lot of science being done in a lot of different domains. You're going to do medical studies about the immune system one day. The next day is going to be metal alloys. The third day is going to be robotics or space science, physics, things like that. So that's what I enjoy a lot, is being able to do something different every day and learning from what we're doing. I think what's really hot right now on the ISS is all the medical side, because we found that the body behaves differently in weightlessness, that viruses, microbes behave differently in weightlessness, and that opens up an avenue for studying all kinds of drugs and treatments and things like that. The other thing is I think physics. We're building crystals, protein crystals in weightlessness. Obviously, on Earth it's hugely difficult because those structures collapse under their own weight. But on board the space station, we can make them better and bigger, and that's the key to, again, a lot of drugs, a lot of treatments, but also have some industrial applications. So I'm very enthusiastic about those two avenues on board the space station.
Up next, the new space race. Thomas Pesquet's views on billionaires going into orbit and what it means for commercial space travel.
For now, it's only a few people, but hopefully we're going to open up to more and more people, and the work that we've done trailblazing the low Earth orbit is going to benefit the entire society. So that's what I'm hoping in the years to come.
Listen to Bloomberg Radio wherever you are, online at BloombergRadio.com, and around the globe via the Bloomberg Business app. Lots happening on Wall Street.
It's the basic law of economics.
It validated what the market was already pricing.
Need to catch up?
This is Bloomberg Wall Street Week. I'm David Weston.
We've got the information and insights
David, you just hit the nail right on the head.
from businesses most influential and instrumental.
And that's the way you run good risk management.
It's a challenging dynamic.
We could continue to see that kind of strength.
Bloomberg Wall Street Week premieres Friday with replays all weekend on Bloomberg Television and Radio. Front Row, exclusive interviews with the most influential figures in finance. Lloyd Blankfein,
Deflation is a terrible thing. Inflation you could tolerate.
Kathy Wood,
Tesla will be in the pole position to dominate.
Jeremy Grantham.
We've had a very, very abnormal honeymoon Goldilocks period.
First available on the Bloomberg Terminal, then on Bloomberg Television and Bloomberg.com. Front Row, the best seats in the house for business's greatest minds.
Thomas Pesquet is part of the elite few who have left the Earth's orbit as a European Space Agency astronaut with 2 tours under his belt. But there are some new entrants into that exclusive club, as billionaires like Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos have taken to the skies in the past year. We discuss the new space race and the privatization of space travel.
Space exploration is going more and more into private hands in terms of funding and, you know, the billionaires also that are involved. First of all, what do you think, Thomas, about billionaires going into space?
I think it's so now it's kind of a work in progress. It's just starting. It reminds me of the first steps of aviation on Earth. You know, it used to be like a niche, and only the wealthy or the wealthiest could afford to travel through, you know, from America to Europe on a plane, and then it became more and more commonplace, and a lot of people could afford to travel, and I think it led us to, you know, knowing each other better, and it had a lot of positive impacts. So I'm hoping that this is what we're going to see in space exploration. For now, it's only a few people, but hopefully we're going to open up to more and more people, and the work that we've done, trailblazing the low Earth orbit, is going to benefit the entire society. So that's what I'm hoping in the years to come.
I guess, you know, longer term, the ISS then disappears and a lot of the astronauts will be sent on commercial ventures to do some of the technology and some of the exploration. Will it change your job or your mission?
It'll change at the margin, but I think the core of the mission is going to remain the same. What we found out is that our job for institutional astronauts, for NASA, ESA, European Space Agency, and others, is to discover, is to explore, and I think we've done that on around the Earth in low Earth orbit. It's been more than 20 years that we've had a sustained human presence with the International Space Station. There's still a lot of science to be done, and we won't abandon the low Earth orbit. But I think now the time has come to bring exploration a step further and deeper into space. And that's what's always happened on the ground as well. If you look at exploration, you get people going there and trying to find out, you know, what the environment is and what you can do. And then more people are coming, you settle, and then explorers go one step further, and then people are following. So I think now it's time to go one step further, go back to the moon with a more sustained human presence, go to Mars. And I think the society is going to follow in our footsteps. That's the plan, at least.
So Thomas, what do you think is a realistic, you know, timescale for a man to develop a permanent base on the moon?
It's a tricky question, and I think right now there's a stage we're at. So to go to the moon, you need a rocket, obviously, which we have. We have the SLS, which is a very large rocket that's needed to go to the moon. You need a ship to bring the astronauts to the moon, and then you need the infrastructures around the moon and on the moon, and that's what we're kind of still working on. So if we're looking at the first flight should be unmanned this year, and then the next first manned flight around the moon should be in 2, maybe 3 years. So it's tomorrow. I mean, it's going to happen very, very soon. After that, it's a matter of years. I think 5-10 years down the line, we'll have started building a base on the moon, and then after the moon, it's a good maybe 10 to 15 years, but then we'll be able to do the same on Mars. So hopefully, I'll have a part to play in there. I obviously love to fly there myself personally, but it doesn't matter if I get to do it or not. What matters is that we're doing it as a team, as a group, as a group of nations, as human beings, and I'll try to play my part, whether it be on a spaceship or on the ground.
I mean, I have to say, a manned mission to Mars within the next decade sounds pretty exciting. What do you think the benefits to humanity would be?
I think on the Mars, we gotta get the answers to a lot of questions that we're asking ourselves. Where do we come from, and where are we going? We know that Mars had like liquid water back in the day, and if it has lost its atmosphere. It used to be probably habitable, just like the Earth, or very similar to the Earth. It's like a twin planet to the Earth, but it had a very different, trajectory. And now it's barren, and it's lifeless, at least as far as we can see. Maybe underground is something, but so by going to Mars, you can answer those questions. Like, could we lose our atmosphere? Could we lose water on the Earth? And also, where did we come from? Because we still don't know. We know the origins of the universe. We know the ingredients that were needed to create life on Earth, but we don't know where they came from. We think they came from comets and asteroids, but we still have a lot of questions about, what we're about and what we're going to become. And that's what we want to answer when we go to Mars.
Thomas, have you ever met Elon Musk? Would you be fascinated by, going on one of his missions? I mean, we're talking about possibly, mining crypto elsewhere. I don't know where the end or the limit is.
Yeah, it's crazy because what we're doing. So yeah, we've met Elon Musk a couple times while flying on a SpaceX Crew Dragon vehicle. You get to meet him a couple times, and it's always interesting to see where his mind is projecting himself. But it's. If I look at what we're doing today, I mean, if you take a step back, we have a space station around the Earth, and it's really, the first time I saw it from the window of my spaceship, it was Star Wars. That's what it is, like the Black Star, this huge, big structure that's floating around the Earth, hugely technological, cables, structures everywhere. It's unbelievable. It's science fiction. 20 years ago, it was unimaginable. So I think there's no limit to what we really can do if we put our minds to it. We're not equipped to dream big. Some people dream bigger than others, and that's why we need those people to take an active part in space exploration. But I really think there's no limit to what we can do, and even what we can imagine today, we're going to do better in 20 years for sure.
Are you concerned about the amount of object actually orbiting the Earth and the fact that it's only going to increase from here? What can we do about it?
Yeah, it's a good question, and that's something that we're watching closely on board the International Space Station, because the International Space Station is big, so it has a big target area for a small debris you can hit anywhere, and we're being hit sometimes by very tiny, pieces of dust and things like this. For bigger objects, we can actually move the station, we can maneuver the station, and we're doing it once in a while, and that enables us to, we track with huge radar dishes, we track all those objects from the ground, and when there's a maneuver that's needed, we can move the station away from a conflicting trajectory. But yeah, we're trying hard with ESA, with NASA, not to produce any debris anymore. We actually have now rules and guidelines. You need to take into account the end of life of those missions, because very often when the satellite runs out of fuel, then it becomes a debris, right, until it slows down and re-enters the atmosphere and burns up. So we've chosen to allocate some amount of fuel to the end of the mission to maneuver the satellite back into the atmosphere, make it burn up. And we have all those rules and guidelines because now we've realized there's a problem. We're going to shoot ourselves in our own feet, right, if we keep creating debris that then is going to hamper our activities.
Coming up, what space still has to teach us. Thomas Pesquet's unique experience of isolation during the pandemic and the opportunities space exploration could bring for tackling our most pressing issues.
We became conscious of our planet by going to space, and I think it's a really fair statement. It's by taking a step back with satellites that we managed to realize that our planet was much smaller than we thought.
This is a market that over the past few weeks has made it clear it wants to go higher. It got a little spooked by the idea that geopolitical tensions are rising.
Bloomberg has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it. Now, you can simply type phrases in everyday English in the command line. Compare financials. Find people. Analyze markets. You can enter phrases or ask questions. What do you want to know today? Ask a question or visit SearchGo to find answers now. Access the financial world on demand. Hear from leading economists, policymakers, and industry experts via live and on-demand webinars, only from Bloomberg. Start exploring to see what's moving the markets. Visit Bloomberg.com/webinars.
Thomas Pesquet is an astronaut who spent more than a year of his life orbiting the Earth on the International Space Station. We discuss geopolitics, scientific progress, and Thomas' first journey outside the atmosphere.
Do you remember that first time, that first day, actually, after years of training, that you went into space? The feeling you got, was it, was it emotional? What did you think?
Yeah, it was hugely emotional. I think if I think back to my first mission, for the entire duration, it takes a lot of years to train for space. I mean, it takes your whole life to qualify and become an astronaut, and then maybe 7-10 years before you get to fly to space. So during this whole time, I had kind of in the back of my head a list of things that could go wrong, because there's so many things that could go wrong. It's like a series of miracles to get you to space. So I had this, I think, to protect myself from the disappointment if one of those things was going to happen and I was not going to go. It's kind of a self-defense mechanism, and also because it's your job as an astronaut to actually face those things, react to those things, and sometimes solve those problems that could prevent you from going to space. And as you get closer to the launch, then the list becomes shorter and shorter. And then you launch, and then you're in space. I remember being in a tiny Soyuz capsule on the way to the space station and thinking, now there's only a few things that could happen. And then when you dock to the space station for the first time in 10 years, that list of things that could prevent me from living my dream was empty. It was just the best feeling ever. I had a smile on my face, I think, for 3 days straight on board the space station, because nobody could take it away from me. I had achieved my dream. It was exhilarating.
Do you think about sustainability? Some people say, well, look, we should, before we go and explore, take care of our planet. And others that believe, well, it's only by exploring space that we can understand more about sustainability and how we save this planet. Exactly.
And I think you're absolutely right. So first of all, I think we became conscious of our planet by going to space, and I think it's a really fair statement. It's by taking a step back with satellites that we managed to realize that our planet was much smaller than we thought. That was actually finite. If from here, from the ground, everything is big, everything is infinite. You have a hard time understanding global phenomenon, happening on a global scale. But if you take a step back, then you see them happening in front of you. It's by sending satellites into space that we can measure, the water temperature, the heights of the oceans, that we can look at the ice caps melting and things like this. It's all from space. So I think going to space is not, it's not different than looking at our planet. It's actually one and the same thing. So that's one step. And the next step, like I said, is again, trying to solve those problems, trying to understand those questions. But to do this, we have to look at other planets. We have to look at other celestial bodies to understand what could happen to us, what might have happened to the Earth, what the phenomena are, and what's at stake. So I think really by going into space, we care a lot about the planet.
Given space tourism and everything we've been talking about, the ISS being replaced, are you very optimistic about space exploration in the next couple of decades, or do you worry that it'll be too commercial, leading also to countries being more rivals than friends?
I think we live in a day and age where there's never been that many, spaceships and rockets and projects to go to space, whether they be governmental, like from in the US, in Europe, in China, and Russia, everywhere, or from private entities. So I think it's good, first of all. It's good that people have recognized the importance of space, that people want to be part of it, that people want to make it happen. And I think it kind of spurs, there's an element of competition, obviously, but it's not that bad. That's what started space exploration at the beginning, right? Competition. And I think it's a very powerful engine to make huge progress in a short amount of time. But then over the long run, it kind of dies out, because once somebody has won the race, then why would you keep running? And what we've done is actually we've switched to a different engine, and that engine is like science and cooperation, and that's a very, very good engine to have a sustained exploration and progression. It's not really good to kickstart an activity because you don't get enough energy, but to sustain it over the long run is actually much better than than competition. So I think a mix of both is what we're seeing right now, and I think it's going to be very beneficial for space exploration. We'll see big international missions, we'll see smaller private missions, and it's going to be very fun to watch and to be part of.
Yeah, is there rivalry actually between astronauts, if you're a French astronaut, or if you're an American or a Chinese astronaut?
No, I don't think so. I mean, within the International Space Station program, we've chosen to all work together and to allocate our resources to reach higher goals than you can do if you're on your own. And that's what you see everywhere in the world. Everything is becoming more global. People recognize that if you have high ambitions, then you have to tackle them at the global scale. And that's what we've done with the International Space Station. It's working really well. So we all partners, we all are working towards the same goals. And now there's new players. Now there's Chinese astronauts that we didn't have before, and other countries now have also ambitions to have astronauts. So I think it's not rivalry. We're actually very curious to meet those guys. Those guys are curious to meet us. Sometimes we get to meet each other. It's actually really fun to exchange. And you see that we have a lot in common. Like, people want to go to space, want to solve problems, want to bring humanity one step further, and it doesn't matter what flag you have on your sleeve when you're doing that.
I mean, it's amazing to think that you had the ultimate isolating experience during the pandemic because you were in space.
Yeah, it's I was going to say funny. It's not funny, obviously, but being isolated during the pandemic, I mean, to me, I kind of related a lot to what people were going through, and hopefully maybe people are relating to what we're going through, because we're professionals at isolation in a way, and so people had to do it as well on their own. The big difference is obviously you do it by choice. When you're an astronaut, you're preparing for it. Lots of people are helping you out, and unfortunately people didn't have that. But I could feel that extra connection of people maybe stuck at home and traveling with us, going on our journey with us, just because we had that extra thing in common.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey. Thomas Pesquet, thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Whether you get your news on TV, on the radio,
on Bloomberg Radio,
on the web, on the Bloomberg Terminal, or the Bloomberg apps, the news that affects your business.
So recap the headlines.
You do not want to miss this story.
How are you thinking about those dynamics?
Is our business. Bloomberg TV and radio. The world is listening. Lots happening on Wall Street.
It's the basic law of economics.
It validated what the market was already pricing.
Need to catch up?
This is Bloomberg Wall Street Week. I'm David Weston.
We've got the information and insights.
David, you just hit the nail right on the head.
From businesses most influential and instrumental.
And that's the way you run good risk management.
It's a challenging dynamic.
We could continue to see that kind of strength.
Bloomberg Wall Street Week premieres Friday with replays all weekend on Bloomberg Television and Radio. Front Row, exclusive interviews with the most influential figures in finance. Lloyd Blankfein.
Deflation is a terrible thing. Inflation you could tolerate.
Kathy Wood.
Tesla will be in the pole position to dominate.
Jeremy Grantham.
We've had a very, very abnormal honeymoon Goldilocks period.
First available on the Bloomberg Terminal, then on Bloomberg Television and Bloomberg.com. Front Row, the best seats in the house for business's greatest minds.
Bloomberg has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it. Now, you can simply type phrases in everyday English in the command line. Compare financials. Find people. Analyze markets. You can enter phrases or ask questions. What do you want to know today? Ask a question or visit SearchGo to find answers now. Access the financial world on demand. Hear from leading economists, policymakers, and industry experts via live and on-demand webinars, only from Bloomberg. Start exploring to see what's moving the markets. Visit Bloomberg.com/webinars.
So this is the lab.
Yeah, this is the robotaxi flex line, where they come in. First, it's just the body. That's what I call it, the body of the vehicle. And then lots of pieces that have to be assembled, put together, tested.
Now, I'm told you're not building a quote-unquote car.
No, I'm not. Does this look like a car to you?
Don't say the word car.
Don't say the word car.
So what is it?
It's a vehicle. Yeah, a transportation vehicle. We'll sell you a ride in this vehicle.
Can we get in?
Of course you can.
All right.
Come on in. There it is.
Okay.
So
it's comfortable.
That's what we want. We don't want you to think about driving. This is why it's not a car.
On the Zoox factory floor, CEO Aisha Evans.
Cameras, long-range LiDAR.
Where she says they're not building a car, but transforming ride-hailing as we know it. She went from Senegal to Silicon Valley, chasing a career in technology where she could have a global impact. After 12 years as a top-ranking exec at Intel, Aisha Evans took a leap into the startup world, joining Zoox, which promptly got bought by Amazon for $1.2 billion. She joins us now for a look at the road ahead on Bloomberg Studio 1.0.
Aisha, so great to be here with you.
Thank you for coming and thank you for having me.
You came to Zoox as CEO in 2019 over from Intel, and just a year later, you sold it to Amazon. How did that happen so quickly?
It was a journey. It takes a lot of capital to take this endeavor all the way. It's a worthy one. And when we looked at the ecosystem, when we looked at everything that was going around, we had to decide whether to stay private or whether to get a long-term oriented partner, like some of our fellow travelers. And then the pandemic hit. That brought a lot of clarity, shall we say. And so the opportunity presented itself, and we went for it.
Why is Amazon the right fit?
First of all, they're a great company. They have created both orthogonal and adjacent multi-billion-dollar businesses. They are long-term oriented, and very purpose-driven. So that matched our ambitions.
They've never owned a car company, though.
Yeah, but we're not a car company.
Exactly.
We're a ride-hailing company.
Talk to me a little bit about how you got to Silicon Valley. Your story is not the story of a typical tech CEO like Jeff Bezos or Andy Jassy. Tell us about your upbringing.
I was born in Senegal, West Africa. My parents, I thank them to this day, sort of made school an implicit expectation. It wasn't up for discussion. Very early on, I showed an aptitude and interest in math, physics, not so much in biology, and in building things. And so they cultivated that. And then I bounced back between Paris and Senegal, learned a lot about what technology does to people's lives and what it makes possible. I literally had a contrast every few months. And so computers were coming online. Not the internet, but what the internet was going to make possible was also coming online. The US was the place to be, to study that. Then basically got jobs in the industry and eventually ended up at Intel in Portland. Through that, started interfacing with Silicon Valley. And then Zoox came along.
I heard a story about you hacking a phone in order to talk to your friends long distance. Did that really happen?
Oh, yeah, it did. I always had a double life a little bit in terms of family, friends in different ecosystems. I still do to this day. And so back then it was landlines. It was expensive.
It was.
And my dad was in telecommunications, so he was not confused. So we had a rotary phone. I'm dating myself, and he locked it. But obviously, I figured out how to still make the phone calls.
Who were your role models back then? I mean, it's so hard for young people, especially young girls, to see themselves in the tech industry.
Mary Curie was and still is a role model. In France, you study philosophy, and a lot of the philosophers are also mathematicians. So they were a role model, and they also force you to think.
You worked your way up to Chief Strategy Officer at Intel. And it was a difficult time for Intel. Intel was kind of losing its way. What was it like working there at that time?
It was a difficult time in the sense that anytime you're successful, you earn the opportunity to talk about what's the next phase of the journey, and I was in the middle of that. But it was also fun. I learned a lot.
What was it like going from an established brand name, storied tech company like Intel to a startup like Zoox? I assume there are major differences in culture and execution there.
It was quite an awakening. So at Intel, I was a little bit known as not a rebel, but somebody who questioned things and who maybe did the normal, oh my gosh, you know, we're too slow, or is this or that or the other.
An agitator of sorts.
An agitator, yes. A change agent, I think, is the elegant way of putting it. And so when I arrived at Zoox, yes, it was fast. We were making decisions quickly. But from an infrastructure standpoint, I was like, whoa, maybe there's a reason for infrastructure. And so, but I embraced the journey and said, okay, we have to build one. When you're doing what we're doing, it's not just about the technology. You have to think about the steps to getting to market. You also have to think about building the company so that it's ready when you scale. If you wait until you need to scale to actually build the infrastructure, bad things happen.
What's it like being a leading Black female executive in such a white male industry?
It depends. I don't wake up in the morning thinking I'm that. I wake up in the morning thinking I'm Aisha, I've got stuff to do, meetings, decisions to make, kids to take care of, making sure dinner's ready. Obviously, in the moment, sometimes I think about it because you look around, but I try and turn it into an opportunity because, and that's just how I have one-on-ones with myself, and how you think about it and how you show up is important. So I try and tell myself that means that I'm bringing a perspective that nobody else has. And that's additive. And then I try and also figure out a way to have what I call an inclusive environment where I see people's point of view and they see mine. And I try not to get angry when it manifests itself in annoying ways.
What are the obstacles that you've overcome to get here?
I think that often people assume, both from a gender and sort of ethnicity standpoint, that it's not normal to be here, and therefore maybe you got a discount, when it's often the opposite. you have to try much harder than others. I've had to work on sort of how I receive information or how I deal with behaviors that are not acceptable, and sort of learn when you take the high roads. I've had to find my voice and not be afraid of it and use it.
Are you pleased with the change you've seen, or has it not changed fast enough?
I can't be pleased. I mean, I'm pleased that there is change, but absolutely not. We have to do a lot more as an industry.
Why isn't it changing faster? Why don't we see more people like you in positions of power?
Well, I think that's a complicated answer. I think it starts very early on. I have a son who participates in Lego robotics, and we had some observations, and kids are, what, 7, 8, and you already see differences. I think also from a social standpoint, around middle school, when there's a transition for girls, maybe having a support system to stay in math, demystifying it, teaching it differently, and then as people come up the ranks, making sure, especially for women, making sure that we have a support system around them so they can traverse through some of the phases, like, for example, marriage and childbirth and so on.
You're building a ride-hailing service, not a car. Why is it important to have a woman in the room? People of different races in the room.
I'll give you a story. We were discussing pick-up and drop-off, and I'm the only woman in the room. Yes, I'm always in jeans and what have you, but occasionally I dress up and have high heels on.
We're wearing high heels today.
Yep, I made a comment when you arrived, right? And so I was like, okay, we have to think about it from that standpoint, because if we're giving ride to customers in San Francisco, for example, on a Friday evening, on a Saturday evening, maybe some folks have heels on, and maybe we need to think about the pickup radius, because expecting them to go up hills in high heels, probably not a good idea.
Are Tesla and Elon Musk competition?
This is Silicon Valley. We, pay tribute to disruptors.
When you think of cutting-edge technology at sea, you might be thinking of stuff like this. But there's an incoming revolution on the high seas that isn't quite as sexy, but could be significantly more impactful.
Container shipping is the key component of global trade. About 80 or 90% of all the world's goods are transported at sea at some point.
But there's a significant unseen cost to the modern era of global commerce.
About 3% of all the world's CO2 emissions come from shipping.
3% may not sound like a lot, but that's roughly comparable to the entire CO2 output of Germany. Since reducing trade isn't a likely option, what about a technological improvement to help reduce the emissions from these well-stocked maritime behemoths?
Let's talk about the competition. What is Zoox's edge over GM's Cruise, Google's Waymo? And if you could level with us, what's their edge over Zoox?
I look at them a little bit like fellow travelers. Yes, we're competitors because we're in the same space and we're going after some of the same things, but this is a big industry. It's not going to be a winner-take-all. Second, it's a safety-critical product, and therefore I think it's important to lay that groundwork. Now, having said that, I would say one of the big differences is that we are going straight to what we think is the ideal product to provide rides to customers. We are not here to enhance your driving experience. We don't even want you to think about driving. So the customer experience is built in such a way that You're here to be transported. You have an app, which you already know how to do today. You have an app where you say, I want to go from point A to point B, especially in dense urban environments. Think downtown San Francisco. And we show up and we pick you up. Sliding doors, you step in, a little bit London cab inspired. We don't ascribe to taking a car that was architected, designed for a human driver, and then adding sensors and compute to it in order to make it fully autonomous.
What about Tesla, which is right down the street? Are Tesla and Elon Musk competition? Fellow travelers?
This is Silicon Valley. We, pay tribute to disruptors. Having said that, we're not exactly in the same business. We don't sell a car to people. We sell a ride to people. Our customers are not drivers, they are riders. And therefore, we use the same types of technologies, but they are in the car selling business.
So how does Zoox fit into the future of Amazon?
Well, that story is yet to be written. First of all, we hope to deliver on the promise of a new segment and sort of a big business and be one of those in the tradition of Amazon. We know there's a world of possibilities, but I tell everybody we first have to earn it, right? Before we talk about sort of synergies and possibilities and opportunities together, 0 times anything is still 0, and it will be for a long time. So we're focusing on building our business, getting to market, and then there's a myriad of possibilities of things we could do together.
Is Zoox going to be dropping off my boxes? Is that what I should expect?
Potentially, if that's the right thing to do and if it makes sense to do so. But first, we're going to make sure to take you everywhere you need to go without having to worry about parking, having a car, and so on.
What's it like having Amazon as your boss?
It's been good. We're an independent subsidiary of Amazon. So yes, they are involved. We agree on what's going to happen, why it's going to happen.
How often did you talk to Jeff Bezos, or do you talk to Andy Jassy, or maybe it's Dave Limp?
I don't talk to them that often. I mean, we have a monthly business review or a quarterly business review. But no, it's not like I'm besties with them and we're on the phone and rapping and chatting, no.
Well, you must know what their expectations are. What is Amazon expecting of Zoox?
Execute, get to market, scale.
And do you have the funding to do that? GM, Google, very well-funded competitors or fellow travelers, as you say. Are you getting what you need?
Yes, more than what I need. Funding is not something I even worry about.
So what's it like to operate in that environment where money's not an issue?
Well, I mean, you have to be careful, right? Because you also don't want to be a drunken sailor and be like, oh, now I have... You still have to be very disciplined. You have to manage the phases of the business. We're like, okay, how do we execute? How do we make our milestones? How do we get to market? Were things organized properly? How do we hire? How do we retain? And so on and so forth. How do we stay mission-driven?
The public seems to have lost interest in waiting around for self-driving cars. I rode in Google's self-driving car in 2011.
Wow.
And I'm still waiting to be able to buy or just ride a self-driving car on demand. Why is it taking so long?
I think in self-driving, first of all, the opportunity is so clear. The reach is so broad. We forgot that big things do start small. One. Second, it's a hard problem to solve. We talk a lot about safety, and we talk a lot about human error when it comes to driving, but we also forget that collectively, at least in the United States of America, humans collectively drive 100 million miles before having a fatality. That's a lot of miles. So humans are also pretty good. And the thing humans are good at, which is, I call it exception handling. We all know how to drive. If we were all fully autonomous, we'd be deployed already, but we're driving amongst human, and you have to deal with so many little scenarios. There are so many things that you've been learning about driving since birth, and codifying that using AI, sensors, and computers is turning out to be a lot harder. Last but not least, it's a safety critical system. None of us should deploy until and unless we have closed loop evidence that we're safe.
So what does the AI need to learn how to do at this point? What are the challenges left to solve?
It needs to know how to deal with unexpected things as they happen.
And is that possible? Can AI learn that?
Of course it's possible. I mean, I'm an optimist when it comes to technology. I started in wireless, so you have to think from switchboards all the way to today. Quite a journey. I'm fascinated by flying, airplanes. The Wright brothers, if they were trying to solve what is being solved in aviation today, they wouldn't have tried. We just let it marinate, let it take its time. The algorithms will get better. Compute gets better all the time. Sensors get better all the time. It will happen.
What about security challenges? We've reported on how Teslas have been hacked.
So you have to design security into your product from the beginning. And for us, we look at all the scenarios of what could happen from a security standpoint. Now, these robots or these robotaxis are also recording all the time. So they sort of know what's happening inside of them and around them. So that gives us a little bit of an edge. And then you look at access. But this is something you just have to pay attention to, understand what's going on in that world, and make sure that you design against it.
What does Aisha Evans see as the future of Zoox? Do you see a global mobility giant, or do you see something more modest?
However you get your news.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak with Lee.
On Bloomberg Radio.
Welcome to Daybreak Australia.
This is Bloomberg Technology.
This is Bloomberg Green.
On TV, radio, and the web, this is Bloomberg.
Mercedes-Benz is on a path towards CO2 neutral mobility. So we have flicked the switch there, and really we're going to step by step electrify everything. And what does that mean? Combustion engines get electrified.
It's really a reminder, isn't it, just how sensitive the markets are to any commentary about trade. We did see some pressure on the yuan, we did see some pressure on the futures. That is now being reversed.
A lot's happening on Wall Street.
It's the basic law of economics.
It validated what the market was already pricing.
Need to catch up?
This is Bloomberg Wall Street Week. I'm David Weston.
We've got the information and insights.
David, you just hit the nail right on the head.
From businesses most influential and instrumental.
And that's the way you run good risk management.
It's a challenging dynamic.
We could continue to see that kind of strength.
Bloomberg Wall Street Week premieres Friday with replays all weekend on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
How many rides have you taken?
A lot. Actually, it's not fair, right? I take a lot of rides, both in our L3 testing fleet, as well as in the ground-up robotaxi.
So when you take a ride, what's your report like generally afterwards?
Well, okay, so two different things. On the test fleet, and this is a big difference between us and our fellow travelers. I mean, our L3 fleet, the Toyota Highlanders that are outfitted with the same sensor architecture, placement, and compute, they are purely engineering test vehicles. So it's called drive review. When I take a ride, it is with understanding what progress we're making, what issues we're still having. I'm fascinated by the scenarios we can't handle, how fast was teleops able to step in, and so on and so forth. So then I have a long report, and the app, and this and that. When I'm in the robotaxi, it's more like, I'm excited. I'm usually giggly. And then after 5 minutes, I'm bored. And I'm on my device, which is what you want.
How is Zoox navigating supply chain challenges? Has the chip crisis impacted you?
Yes, it has. It's impacted everybody. Look, first of all, some things are just more expensive than they should be. Second, but you accept that. It's the same for everybody. You have to get a lot more crisp around your needs because lead times are longer. And that's really when it pays off to have had a good relationship with your suppliers and treated them as partners so you can talk about your problem statement and arrive to solutions. But it hasn't slowed us down. It's just been an extra vector to manage.
Uber and Lyft seem like they would be obvious partners. Have you talked to them?
In this industry, there are no secrets. And we're all friends. We all talk to each other at some level or another. So yes, we all have talked to each other.
Who do you imagine would be your first customers?
Well, first of all, Las Vegas, we've been public that's our first launch. I call it sort of affectionately a one-street dense urban environment. How's that? With a lot of demand. And then we really think that in starting, at least at the beginning, big cities that have a very dense urban sort of landscape where people are going to work, people are going to museums, people are going to restaurants. They don't want to worry about parking. We think that will be the first customer.
So commercialization is on the horizon in Las Vegas and also San Francisco.
That would be next.
How do you stay motivated on that road to commercialization, given that there are still, as you say, these hard problems to solve?
Because every day, literally, either something happens in terms of progress. And it's really important to not just look at the ultimate success, but I call it like kind of along the way, the little celebration. I mean, even when I do drive review, yes, I have a long list or, you know, oh, what about this, what about that? But the vehicle will do something new or something awesome, and you're like, oh my gosh, you go, awesome. So there are so many things that happen on a daily basis, weekly basis, that you see advancement. It's like climbing, right? It's like you get to a certain element or a certain place, you appreciate the journey, you turn around, you look down, you see what you've done, then you're like, all right, let's go for the next peak.
So as you put points on the board, what does Aisha Evans see as the future of Zoox? Do you see a global mobility giant, or do you see something more modest?
I see, I want, and I hope to lay the foundation for a global mobility giant. We talked about human beings need transportation everywhere. It opens up access to economic mobility, it opens up access to knowledge, it opens up access to inclusion, not to mention safety, the environment, and frankly, humans, we're just too valuable to spend also 400 billion hours worldwide driving. And we think that this is at the center of that puzzle. So that is the goal.
All right. So we're going to do, this is a little rapid fire section now. So just quick answers. What does Zoox stand for?
The word Zoox is basically a marine sort of species that is solar powered and self-moving in the ocean.
Interesting. Best piece of advice for your 20s?
Take a chill pill, it'll be okay.
What about your 40s?
Enjoy the journey, you've made it.
I hear you owned a restaurant at some point, is that true?
I confuse the love of cooking and running a restaurant.
What's your favorite thing to cook?
Chebujan, which is a Senegalese dish.
Biggest guilty pleasure?
Trashy books.
Ooh, what books?
I'm not telling.
Speaking of fellow travelers, what's your favorite travel destination?
Hawaii.
Me too. Which island?
Kauai.
I'm from Hawaii. Kauai all the way. Last TV show you binged?
I'm in the middle of it, Bridgerton.
Ooh. What's your view on work-life integration? I don't use the word balance.
Work-life choices, setting expectations on all sides.
How do your kids fit into your life?
They are everything. They are the beginning and the end.
Our driverless future is always right around the corner, or 10 years away. Give us a realistic timeline. When can we ride in a Zoox?
A lot of people ask me, when can I tell my kids they shouldn't get a driver's license? And I think it's going to be probably my kids' kids.
Arguments for and against going public?
Against, definitely focus. The quarterly pressure is something I understand and know, and this is a long-term journey, so focus is important. For, it seems to be everybody's dream in this valley.
Is it yours? Is
no,
that the plan?
No. My dream is to get this robotaxi out there and to see it deliver the promise that I know it will.
Is Zoox going to be on public roads this year?
I don't know. We'll have to see.
What about 10 years? What does success look like for Zoox in 10 years?
Several cities. And there I say, hey, I'm going to Zoox my way over there.
Aisha Evans, CEO of Zoox, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you.
My pleasure. I appreciate you coming over.
exclusive interviews with the most influential figures in finance. Lloyd Blankfein.
Deflation is a terrible thing. Inflation you could tolerate.
Kathy Wood.
Tesla will be in the pole position to dominate.
Jeremy Grantham.
We've had a very, very abnormal honeymoon Goldilocks period.
First available on the Bloomberg Terminal, then on Bloomberg Television and Bloomberg.com. Front Row, the best seats in the house for business's greatest minds. Wherever you get your news.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak with Lee.
On Bloomberg Radio.
Welcome to Daybreak Australia. This is Bloomberg Technology. This is Bloomberg Green.
On TV, radio, and the web, this is Bloomberg.
BSO Now is your online home for weekly Boston Symphony Orchestra and Boston Pops performances. See new concerts that go behind the scenes, plus acclaimed archival concerts. Visit bso.org/now, where the music plays on. BSO season sponsor, Bank of America.
When you think space, you probably think one space agency that travels under the radar is ESA, which is surprising considering what the European Space Agency has achieved and how vital it is to the global space industry.
We've collaborated with pretty much everybody who is involved in space exploration.
But ESA wants to be a leading force in furthering humanity's mission into space.
Commander Ground, do you copy? Copy.
If we want to have successful human missions to Mars, we are going to have to learn to live and work off-world in a different way. The place where we are going to learn to do that is on the moon.
Can ESA help humanity take its next giant leap?
So, in real life, you're the CEO of Roblox, but on Roblox, you're Builder Man.
You know that name? We just thought it up when it was maybe 2 weeks after we launched, and we were all picking our own usernames, and everyone picked one. I just said, Builderman.
So you've had the same avatar since 2004.
That's right.
That's awesome. Do you still play?
I do. I wish I could play the whole day. I have to be a CEO.
So how often do you play?
I'm probably on every day, but not as much as I would like.
I have 4 kids. I have a 9-year-old son who's on Roblox a lot. He said his favorite games are the tycoon games.
Oh, Lumber Tycoon, Theme Park Tycoon.
Gym
I love
Tycoon.
those. I love all of those. I have a bit of a theory. I have 4 kids.
Oh, you
and
do?
They're now in. They've grown up watching me do this.
Yeah.
And now they're pretty savvy social media people, but I'm optimistic someday they're going to be using Roblox for some other reason, like communicating or more working or something like that. And then they're going to be like, oh gosh, I was like forced to be on Roblox.
It's a portmanteau of robots and blocks where users can build and play games in a 3D world. Roblox has boomed into a global online gaming juggernaut that kids are obsessed with, to the tune of 10 billion plus hours a quarter. In fact, Roblox was building the metaverse long before Mark Zuckerberg claimed a new name for Facebook. But what does the future metaverse really look like? And how do we cultivate a civil digital society within it that keeps kids safe? Joining me now on this edition of Bloomberg Studio 1.0, Roblox CEO and co-founder, David Baszucki.
David, so great to have you here.
I really appreciate it. It's wonderful to be with you.
Well, I'm a parent, I'm a mom, and so I've been really excited to have this conversation. For parents and anyone out there who still doesn't quite understand, what exactly are kids doing on Roblox?
Yeah, kids on Roblox aren't just playing, they're learning, they're hanging out together. When they can't be together in real life, they're hanging out on Roblox. They could be playing hide and go seek. They could be pretending they're running a store or a pizza parlor. They could be making the next big game or adventure. So it's really a wide range of things, and it involves doing things together, pretending you're together.
So right now it's mostly games or experiences for kids by kids. How old are these players? How old are these developers?
We have young players who are getting interested in coding, who are getting interested in designing things, but more and more the community on Roblox has blossomed into this super rich ecosystem, thousands of developers making a living on the platform. Some of these developers are making tens or 20s or 50 millions of dollars a year.
So how many of these developers are really kids, and how many of these developers are now grown-ups?
Yeah, well, so think 2 million plus developers. A lot of them are grown-ups, and more, in addition to the natural organic people that started on Roblox, we're starting to have studios come in on the platform as well. Professional game developers who are developing on other platforms starting to take a look at it. So our developer demo naturally leans a little bit older, although we've had kids as young as 13.
Is there something about preserving the ability for young kids to be able to make games for other kids? I mean, because obviously if you have, fancy studios muscling in, does that change the dynamic of the platform?
I think it does. One of my favorite experiences is natural disasters. It's been on the platform forever by one of our early developers. It's not the kind of thing that I think a normal studio would ever think of, but when developed by a young creator, we're gonna be hanging out together and there's gonna be a hurricane and we gotta run away from it, or there's gonna be a lightning storm. Like that kind of stuff, we see a lot of that creative gameplay coming from the younger developers.
What were you into as a kid? Were you a gamer?
I was kind of a nerd when I was a kid. I studied really hard. I luckily grew up in Eden Prairie, Minnesota. At the time, it was out in the boonies from Minneapolis, Minnesota. So there were sand pits, and so we did a lot of model rockets, and we built go-karts, and it's kind of one of these idyllic childhoods. The one key thing that happened to me very early on is we had a computer lab in the school, and then my parents bought me an Apple II at the time, and that kind of got me interested in this.
I also heard you were the captain of your high school TV quiz team.
Yeah, so think of Minnesota in the 1970s and 80s, where every weekend 2 different schools compete, 4 students from each school, in a really funny 4x4 configuration on a quiz bowl thing. And so, yeah, Eden Prairie had a pretty good quiz bowl team.
You eventually made it to Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
You went to Stanford. You started a company called Knowledge Revolution in the 80s where users could create and test physics experiments.
That's right.
So the science kid in you coming to life.
Yeah, went to school, had a couple hard years with jobs that weren't really that exciting, took a few months off, and I got really excited about, there's this whole blossoming educational software marketplace. The Macintosh had just been introduced, and it was just really interesting and exciting. I did a survey of all of that, and a lot of the educational software was very pre-canned. So when we looked at physics, it was a whole different idea. Could we make a wide open laboratory where you could build anything, any physics experiment, bring it to life, measure it, see what it feels like?
You sold that company, made some money, you became an investor, and you invested in Friendster.
Oh yeah, wow.
I had a Friendster account. I'm dating myself a little bit here, but I had a Friendster account. I'm curious what you learned from the early days of social media.
Yeah, so one thing I learned is it was really fun to invest, but it's not my sweet spot. Like my sweet spot is trying to build and create things. I remember, I think, having account number 79 on Friendster and just seeing that wonderful thing of finding other people, friend of friend, playing around with that early user interface. It's a little bit almost thinking of interactive physics where we were simulating the world, and then Friendster, seeing how important social is. Those are a couple of the components that have come together in Roblox.
So when you started Roblox in 2004, what was the idea back then?
The feeling of this new category, for me, started feeling almost inexorable. It's a category that people have been talking about in sci-fi for many, many years. We've seen futurists talk about it. We've seen a lot of movies. We were thinking, yes, immersive 3D co-experience.
Kids flocked to Roblox during the pandemic. You went public in the middle of the pandemic, 2021, $45 billion market cap. We spoke on that day. Even you have said that kind of growth won't keep up. What kind of growth can we expect from Roblox in normal times?
We believe it's going to be a part of all of our lives. It's going to be the way we communicate, how people get to go to school when they can't get into school, how people...
So they're going to go to school in Roblox?
If I happen to be taking my science class and I can't get into the classroom and we're dissecting a frog, we'll probably dissect a frog in something like Roblox on a simulation, which I think is going to be very, very powerful. And for our company, where there's a lot of people that are going to end up working all around the world, some of us will be in the office, some won't, having a common 3D place where we can have those water cooler conversations where everyone has a desk, but we get that serendipitous thing where we both happen to go over and chat, I think also is going to be very big.
Your goal is to build an entirely new category of human co-experience. How do you moderate that on such a massive scale?
Everyone you meet in Port Harcourt has stories about what they call black soot, caused by the manufacturing and consumption of these fuel products in the illegal refineries.
Oil theft, known as bunkering, and the refining of its spoils is worsening the damage from decades of fossil fuel exploitation, creating one of the world's most severe ecological disasters.
Our sacred forests, our homes, have to give way to oil wells, and no one gets much benefit.
Imagine a resident of Port Harcourt who inhales this soot every second in 24 hours, 7 days a week, 30 days in the month, and for years now, we are dying slowly but surely, and our lifespan is reducing every day.
Everybody is talking about the metaverse as something that's going to happen in the future, but there's an argument to be made that Roblox has already built a metaverse. What do you think?
I think we've started, and it goes back to how exciting it is to have a company in this space that I think has ultimately got so many years of growth to it and is a new category following other types of technologies. There's still so much innovation to be done, and there's so much invention to be done in this category that it's mind-boggling.
The critics think that metaverse, the term, is just marketing. How do you respond to that?
This type of technology is much more difficult than the net or the web, which was another huge thing that we saw predicted and has started to come. But I think we're seeing early signs of it.
When Mark Zuckerberg announced his plan to own the metaverse and change Facebook's name to Meta as if it was something new, did that kind of bother you?
No, of course not. It's really hard to predict in 5 to 10 or 20 years what are the companies that really figure it out? And there's so many elements of innovation that are needed. Having a UGC community, one of our strengths, we think that's like a huge starting point for us, but we're early in our quest for innovation here.
Roblox has built a huge business selling Robux. Does this evolve into a much bigger marketplace?
It was this revelation that people would ultimately make a living on platforms like this that started this digital currency. It's very Roblox-centric in that we're a systems company or a utility, so it has formed this robust economy. It's allowed us to keep Roblox is free for the vast majority.
Would Roblox ever partner with some of these other companies working on the metaverse, whether it is Meta or Unity or Epic or Microsoft?
The core technology of, how are we going to ultimately support 50,000 people in real time on a phone, going to a concert together and waving at your friends? I think that's going to be a lot of engineering work that each company is going to be working on, and it's going to be really hard. As far as ultimately, can an avatar go from one place to another? I think there'll be lightweight ways of starting to think about that.
So what role do you think Apple and Android should play in the metaverse? Or would their policies need to change to really support this vision?
The biggest thing we would take advantage of if it were to happen is a change in those store fees. We stay out of it. We let Google and Apple kind of run their businesses. But when we think about more and more developers making a living on platforms like us and having to build stuff, if those store fees were to change, we would move most of that money back to our developers.
Your goal is to build an entirely new category of human co-experience, the next phase of human interaction.
Yeah.
How do you moderate that on such a massive scale?
Yeah,
and are you doing a good enough job?
In the third week when we were live, you can go imagine Eric and myself back in our small office. Eric and I said, oh my gosh, safety and civilities, we're gonna have to do it. We had maybe 100 people at the time chatting on Roblox. We saw a few, not that egregious, but early signs, and we just made the call. This is gonna be the foundation of what we do. In the early years of Roblox, as we've gotten bigger, we've gotten to the point where there's thousands of moderators. Every image that goes on our platform gets human reviewed. We filter text very stringently, especially for 13 and under players. We use a lot of AI and ML to help do this. We're always getting better, but it is a key thing for us.
How optimistic are you about AI and tech being able to do that?
I'm really actually optimistic. We would never compare to the real world because our standards are so much more stringent. But I do believe this will just keep getting better and better. And I think over time it'll get to the point where if a 6-year-old is on our platform, it's literally as if the parents wanted to be there with them watching everything. We'll be able to offer that type of thing.
Now, a lot of parents are terrified. They're terrified of a future metaverse. They don't understand the parental controls. Do you understand that feeling?
We do. We actually have to, I think it creates a higher standard for us because I think we can't assume every parent is going to get that involved with their kids.
There have been some serious content challenges, you know, stories about Roblox being a playground for virtual fascists.
Yeah, this is on Roblox.
Well, there was just this story about Kim Kardashian's own child seeing an ad for a game that claimed to have a sex tape of her.
Yeah.
What happened there?
That was very unfortunate. There was a text blurb up very shortly that very, very few people saw. We took the place down. We moderated that user, and they're off our platform. It was the video was never on our platform. There was no imagery on our platform. It was a very short mention, but very unfortunate. And well, you know, our vision is to be the most civil place for everyone.
I asked Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Alphabet and Google, this question about kids and tech habits and screen time, and he said it's something that even stresses him out. You know, this is the guy who runs one of the most powerful technology companies in the world. I have 4 kids, you have 4 kids. Did it stress you out? Like, how did you deal with your kids?
I think it highlights how much it's a responsibility of both platforms like us as well as parents. You know, we're all trying to figure this out. I think the one thing that we're very encouraged is that the time spent on Roblox tends to be more like hanging out together or being on the phone together or doing stuff together, and a lot less of it is isolated, either consuming content by myself or grinding away at something by myself. So we do like the fact that most of this is either social or involved in creation.
What about entertainment? Would Roblox ever make a Netflix show?
Bloomberg has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it. Now, you can simply type phrases in everyday English in the command line. Compare financials. Find people. Analyze markets. You can enter phrases or ask questions. What do you want to know today? Ask a question or visit SearchGo to find answers now.
Stocked early enough all these precious materials you were just mentioning, and we were on the lucky side that our prognosis was spot on in a way, forecasting what kind of material we would need and what quantity we would need.
Access the financial world on demand. Hear from leading economists, policymakers, and industry experts via live and on-demand webinars, only from Bloomberg. Start exploring to see what's moving the markets. Visit Bloomberg.com/webinars.
Like real life.
So are you pushing towards something like Meta Horizon Worlds? Does that sound, more experiences like that for adults?
We sometimes think of Roblox ultimately as fading into the background as a utility like the electric grid. Even though it's photorealistic and there's all these awesome avatars and connection and identity around the world, the things we start seeing built on this are a wide range of things.
So you imagine this not just for kids, but for everyone, adults
That's
too?
Right.
Okay.
Absolutely.
What about entertainment? Would Roblox ever make a Netflix show?
We would love it if one of our developers made a Netflix show. So we would feel much more authentic. One of the creators on Roblox who's coming up with avatars and stories and ideas and characters, we want them to be in the limelight.
Roblox shares took a dive on the back of Netflix results, which obviously plummeted. Are investors reading too much into the connection there?
I think our company is somewhat unique, and what is very exciting to go to work and be the CEO is being in a market like this, where we think ultimately billions of people are going to use this type of technology. And the other exciting thing about this market, there are so many big inventions that still have to happen. Mm-hmm. It feels like we're pretty mature, but inside our company, we realize there's 6 or 7 big inventions we need to make to get to that next step.
Would Roblox ever consider more in-game advertising?
Yeah, there's a funny trivia note I would share to all the Roblox fans out there. There was a time, the very first way we monetized was advertising. And then there was also a time when we had pre-roll video on Roblox. That's all gone now. And it's gone for a couple of reasons. We didn't want it to interfere with the user experience. And also our virtual economy has become such a powerful way to power this that we're able to take that down. In the future, though, I think there's a certain type of advertising that is kid-safe, that is immersive, that doesn't get in your way.
And how do you make sure that doesn't take away from the ethos of what makes Roblox great?
Yeah, I think the people on Roblox, they're there to authentically connect with their friends. And as long as what we're doing with these brands is very clear, non-deceptive, appropriate for those ages, I think they'll figure out the balance of how much time do we go into a store versus how much time do we go to a crazy adventure tycoon and build an amusement park together.
So either way, this could be a huge new revenue stream for you.
I believe it's an awesomely huge revenue stream, and at the same time, we've been very gentle towards it.
So as you look ahead, what do you think are the biggest challenges Roblox will face?
If our vision plays out, which we hope it does, and we have people of all ages on the platform and we're around the world, I think maintaining that civility as we grow, as we have older people who might want to go to a political rally, thinking ways to do that in a systemic way, that's a big challenge. It takes a lot of thought. I think thinking through the technology, I really we're a very technology-driven company, so it's fun to be running a company where we have to do these 7 big inventions, and what we're doing right now isn't going to cut it. So knowing that technology challenge is super interesting.
We do a little rapid fire section just to get to know
okay.
you a little better.
I'm going to try to be as spontaneous as I can.
First question, what's your morning routine?
Wake up, go outside on my porch, do a CrossFit workout, take a shower, go to work.
Where are you most productive, home or office?
Both. Different types of productivity, home, Zen state, flow state at time, office, connecting, being together, brainstorming.
What's your favorite show right now? What are you binging?
Oh my gosh, if you looked at my YouTube history, it's this weird mechanical stuff, off-road vehicles and rockets and ships and big waves.
Best life hack.
I think it all gets down to the joy of health, really. Like if I'm not, feeling centered, both sleep, exercise, diet, all of that, everything else just completely falls.
You used to have a talk radio show.
Yeah.
Now that I've met you in person, I get this.
No way.
I see how you'd be
You're
pretty
kidding.
fun to listen to. Yeah. What was your style? Like, what was your jam?
So my jam was, I would say, starting in college when I would have insomnia at 2 a.m., I would turn on talk radio, and all those famous KGO people, Bill Wattenberg, Ray Taliaferro, just listen to the people calling in. So I, after Knowledge Revolution was acquired, and I had a year, I had a little time to dabble. My jam was really trying to talk about outrageous topics, gambling, other controversial things. And it was in a small market in Santa Cruz. So I would typically, it's really hard to get people to call in.
Yeah.
It's
like call your mom, please call.
So it's really scary if you're a DJ and no one's calling in. So I made it really controversial. I have people come on and debate interesting topics.
If you could have dinner with Steve Jobs or Walt Disney, who would you pick?
Both?
You can't pick both.
I guess I would have to slightly lean Disney just because he was not just the usher of the innovation, but actually was kind of part of some of the innovation. But I think Steve leaned much more on finding the people to drive that innovation.
Best advice for your 20s?
Don't freak out if between the age of 22 and 25, everything is a disaster.
Best advice for your 40s?
Life is short. It's such a valuable commodity. Every day, what you do, your friends, your time, your family is so important.
So how do you define work-life integration? I don't like the word balance.
Yeah, I would say, can I make my Roblox job better than anything else I would do? Like, can it be better than retiring? Can it be better than a hobby? Can I figure out what my unique job as a CEO, every CEO job is different. Like, I like doing it. So can I figure out what my role is?
You mentioned your co-founder, Eric Castle, earlier, who died tragically of cancer in 2013. If he was here today, what do you think he would think of the Roblox that Roblox has become?
Wow, I think he'd be proud. It's a good question.
Yeah.
Like, I think he would, his both of his sons have worked at the company a bit. So yeah, I think he'd be very proud.
Seems like you miss him.
He's just such a brilliant partner, yeah. And he also set the standard for taking the long view on how we engineer things. A lot of the technology at Roblox is still, like, his vision lives on.
And it goes back to your advice for your 40s. Life is short.
It is.
So in 5 years, will the metaverse exist? In the form that you imagine, or is it going to take much longer? Like, what's the time horizon?
Well, it's really interesting, right? Because we're right in the middle of it right now, in a sense, with 50 million people every day on our platform. Yeah. It's already here. And at the same time, what is ultimately going to be possible could be 5, 10, or 20 years out. So it's all, the metaverse really has existed since online dial-up MUDs, really, 2D, very simple text. You could call that the metaverse. It existed in multiplayer gaming, World of Warcraft. It exists now with more people. And in 10 or 20 years, it'll exist photorealistically with 50,000 people.
You clearly have so much passion for this job. Is Roblox your final stop on your journey?
Well, it's definitely my final stop, but I think there's a lot of time ahead of me here.
Dave Baszucki, CEO of Roblox, thank you so much.
market that over the past few weeks has made it clear it wants to go higher. It got a little spooked by the idea that geopolitical tensions are rising.
Companies now, they're getting hundreds, maybe even thousands of applications. So software has come in to automate the process.
You want to write your resume for robots, not for humans. The only job your resume has is to be comprehensible to the software that is reading it, because that software or robot is going to decide whether or not a human ever gets their eyes on it.
These things are programmed by a certain segment of the population that might not be totally inclusive or not be fully aware.
Concerns about how this technology could exacerbate discrimination. For the FTC, I think foremost, the FTC needs to be making sure that we're fully understanding this technology.
We don't trust companies to self-regulate when it comes to pollution. We don't trust them to self-regulate when it comes to workplace comp. Why on earth would we trust them to self-regulate AI?
Deflation is a terrible thing. Inflation you could tolerate.
You could trade anything as a trend fall.
When you think about Bitcoin, I don't think it's a currency. I think it's a commodity.
Today, we're in an everything bubble.
I'm Jason Kelly. Welcome to Bloomberg's Front Row. Today, I'm talking to Joseph Bay and Scott Nuttall, the co-CEOs of KKR, in their first major interview since being promoted to those jobs late last year. Bay and Nuttall now run one of the most storied investment firms in the world. It was founded in 1976 by Henry Kravis and George Roberts, along with their mentor, Jerome Kohlberg. Now, 25 years after joining as analysts, Bay and Nuttall have inherited an even more influential company with tentacles into every corner of the global economy. A pioneer in the leveraged buyout world, remember barbarians at the gate? KKR now spans not just private equity, but credit, infrastructure, insurance, and capital markets, with almost $500 billion in assets under management. Even home base is different. KKR last year moved from its historic headquarters on 57th Street in New York to the brand new Hudson Yards complex on the west side of Manhattan, giving the firm a whole new view. They're investing across the globe, a world roiled by political turmoil, fears of inflation, anxious corporate leaders, and a whole lot more scrutiny.
I think what you're also seeing now is there's a recognition, given the breadth of the industry, the magnitude of what we all do, the responsibility is very large. And that's why I think everybody's now saying, look, we've got to make sure we do this in the right way.
Here's what I talked about with Joe and Scott. Growing up in the modern investing business, the retailization of private equity, anxious CEOs in an age of inflation and volatility, and putting their stamp on the firm. Here's my interview with Joe Bay and Scott Nuttall. Guys, it's really good to be here in your relatively new house. And I have to say, I'd love to start there because this feels different. This feels like a different KKR, different space, new leaders. Joe, what's different about KKR today?
Sure. For those of you, you've been to our offices at 9 West 57th, where we were for 38 years. When we decided to move to Hudson Yards, it was very intentional what we wanted to design. We wanted a physical manifestation of really the firm's value around collaboration, the ability to work together, more collegiality, and we have such a young workforce today, an environment where young people, young demographics would want to come to work every day.
So, Scott, we're going to talk about when you two were younger, and you came in here and came to 9 West, as Joe alludes to, but build on what Joe just said about kind of how it's different, because here in 2022, this is a different firm than what you joined. It's much wider in its ambition to some extent. Put some numbers around that for me.
Yeah, sure. So we are a diversified global firm now. So there has been a lot of change, especially over the last 10 to 12 years. We really expanded meaningfully post the financial crisis. So today we manage approaching $500 billion. It's highly diversified across equity, which is roughly $200 billion with some rounding, 200 in credit, about 100 in real assets, real estate and infrastructure. We're global. So we have 21 offices around the world, about 1,900 people. We own a majority of an insurance company. So the breadth of what we're covering today is significantly greater than what we looked like 10, 15 years ago. The one thing that hasn't changed is the culture of the firm, the DNA of the firm. We still run the firm as one connected enterprise. Everybody participates in everything. And this office, and not only this office, we have a new office in London. We have several new offices around the world that are in this spirit. More open format, opportunities for people to bump into each other, because there's more of us to cover all this ground, but we want to make sure everybody stays connected and that we can continue to make sure relationships travel, ideas travel. That part hasn't changed and will never change. There's just more of us doing it now.
So someone tuning into this might say, oh, KKR co-CEOs. I know those guys. It's Henry and George. Wait, what? Like, here you are. You're new to the job. People want to know who you are. You grew up here in many ways. So let's go back. 1996, you both show up basically at the same time, right? Same class.
That's right.
How does that happen?
Well, we were the two analysts hired in the New York office in 1996. So we were the extent of the analyst class. It was a very small...
You were the class.
Yeah, we were the class. It was a very small firm, very small industry at the time. So we showed up. He got here about 6 weeks before me.
I was a senior analyst.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. He still holds that over me. But, you know,
it's like which twin is born
two of us.
first,
You know,
right?
we sat next to each other. And we really arrived at age 24. So we've now been here over 25 years. So we've spent more than half our lives here together, became fast friends. Our families have kind of grown up together. And we've been very close throughout. So we've been working together for 25 years and with Henry and George for 25 years.
Well, we'll talk about those guys in a second. But Joe, take me back to those days. So you get here, this guy shows up. Like, what do you remember? What do you remember about those times, the firm and the meet cute that is the future of the firm?
Well, I think one of the really fun parts of us growing up together, we both showed up married at the age of 24, right? High school sweetheart, college sweetheart. We were married. We had a lot of the same lifestyle, quite frankly, both at work and outside of work. We had our first kids the same year. Yeah. So Scott has 5 kids, I have 4 kids. Our 7 boys go to the same school in New York City. So we really feel like we've grown up together for the last 25 years. The second thing I remember is there used to be a McDonald's on 57th Street that we would go to every night for dinner. So probably not good for us.
We weren't eating healthily.
Wow, that's not the view I have of private equity. Like McDonald's, come on.
Well, we were kind of in the trenches together. There were only 2 people in the office working on all the deals, and so whoever was less busy took the deal. But we were there working away, and yeah, dinner together every night, and then we'd spend time together on the weekends. Our families still vacation together. People think we're a little strange. Yeah. We spend a lot of time together, but we're really great friends.
And so then there's this sort of critical moment, sort of fast forwarding a little bit, roughly 5 years ago, when Henry and George come to the two of you and say, we're elevating both of you. I think a lot of people watching this who work on Wall Street or know of Wall Street are like, oh, yeah, good luck with that. Like, how's that gonna go? And obviously you had some role models in Henry and George, but those guys are cousins. They've known each other, you know, they've been best friends since they were 7. What was the moment like when it's like, okay, here you go, guys?
It felt very natural, quite frankly. I mean, Henry and George, what they have role modeled for the entire firm for 45 plus years now is the power of co-CEOs, co-leadership. If you have the right chemistry, the right trust, the right communication at the top of the house. And with all the ground we're trying to cover around the world and all these different products, 2 is definitely better than 1. But that chemistry and trust is absolutely foundational to the success.
Yeah, Henry and George's relationship, and the 2 of them, it's really the DNA of the firm. And if you think about it, that's all we've known, you know, is co-CEO leadership at KKR. And how watching the 2 of them lean on each other, trust each other, lead the firm for our entire 25-year history here, they really were role models for us as to how do you do this the right way. So we recognize this normally doesn't work. We recognize that it is something that is bucking the trend. But in our firm, it would almost be odd to do it any other way.
Right. And it's not just us.
No, that's right.
The head of our U.S. business in private equity, we have co-heads. In Europe, we have co-heads. In Asia, we have co-heads. In credit and market, we have co-heads. It is actually culturally for us very, very normal and feels good.
Right. And if you go back to how much ground we have to cover, the global nature of the firm, the 30 investing businesses, we have a balance sheet, we have an insurance company. It is so much better to have two of us, and then we can kick ideas around with each other, counsel each other on the harder questions. And we also still greatly have Henry and George as sounding boards still working with us.
The Indian city of Jamnagar is a money-making machine for Asia's richest man, Mukesh Ambani. His company Reliance has the world's biggest oil refinery complex here in the city. Jamnagar is also where Ambani is making his newest bet, a $10 billion investment in green energy. His ambition is closely aligned with the Indian government's plan to reach net zero emissions by 2070. But Ambani is not alone. India's second richest man, Gautam Adani, has committed $20 billion of investment over the next decade. But India's massive dependencies on fossil fuels have some environmental advocates questioning the realism and sincerity of those green ambitions and those of its two biggest billionaires.
A lot's happening on Wall Street.
It's the basic law of economics.
It validated what the market was already pricing.
Need to catch up?
This is Bloomberg Wall Street Week. I'm David Weston.
We've got the information and insights.
David, you just hit the nail right on the head.
From businesses most influential and instrumental.
And that's the way you run good risk management.
It's a challenging dynamic.
We could continue to see that kind of strength.
Bloomberg Wall Street Week premieres Friday with replays all weekend on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
One of the most market shifts, it feels like, of late is private equity increasingly considered from a retail perspective. This is probably more in your major, Scott. The retailization, it feels like, is one of the biggest sort of mega trends out there. What does that actually look like, and how did we get here relatively? It felt like it was moving along, and then it suddenly accelerated. Sure. What happened?
Yeah, sure. I think the first thing to understand is who we work for, right? We have a huge responsibility. So the legacy of the industry is historically defined benefit public pension plans. So we're really fortunate. We get to work for the better part of 20 million public retirees, teachers, firefighters, policemen and women, municipal workers. And what happens is those defined benefit plans are professionally run, and they have an allocation to alternatives as part of their asset allocation. And that's historically how the industry was built. But at the end of the day, we're really working for individuals. They're counting on us to build their retirement wealth, and they want to make sure it's there when they get to that point. And so if you step back from that and say, all right, how has the world evolved? Well, not only is there defined benefit plans, but there's also defined contribution, and there is an increasing percentage of the world that is actually managing their own retirement wealth for themselves.
401ks,
IRAs, you name it. And so it's a bit of an odd dynamic right now if you think about it. If you're a retired teacher in the state of Texas, somewhere between 30 and 40% of your retirement plan is actually invested in alternatives. If you're a retired accountant in the state of Texas, you don't have access to those same investment choices. We just think over time, and I think this is where the industry has gone, is like, that's not going to be the case in 10 years. You know, is there an ability to actually take some of what we do and create product that is relevant to those that are managing their own retirement wealth? And so I think what you've mentioned is this, there's been this drumbeat for a while. I think there's an increasing recognition that's where the puck is going, and then people are trying to skate there.
And so does it feel like it's accelerating, and what happens next in this sort of retail, not to overstate it, but almost revolution that it feels like we're in?
Well, I think what you're going to see is a few things. One, you're going to see more products being developed across different asset classes. And so that has started, but I do think that's going to accelerate. And a lot of what you're reading about now is part two, which is, to Joe's point, you've got to build out teams that have a bit of a different orientation, are covering financial advisors, are covering systems in a different way than the institutional coverage model used to work. And so you're seeing firms staff up and actually build those relationships on the ground, because the dollar invested per client is obviously a lot smaller. It's a different distribution effort entirely. So you need to build that out. And between the product build out and the distribution build out, then there's the third question of marketing. How do you get the story out there the right way? How do you educate the financial advisors so they understand what we do, so we can make sure that what we have on the product side is suitable for their client?
I want to dig in on this issue of responsibility in some ways. You guys are top of the pyramid. You are arguably, if we walk down, with all apologies to every one of your competitors, if we walk down a street in New York City or any major metropolis and said, name one private equity firm, many people would say KKR. With great power comes great responsibility in many ways. Especially now, as we talked about, post-global financial crisis, more and more attention is being paid on firms like yours. How do you live up to that? How do you ensure that you're doing right by not just your folks, but your clients, your customers, and sort of projecting that to the world, Joe?
It's incredibly important. And, you have to be really intentional, right? I think the two big buckets are probably around sustainability and ESG, where in today's world, you have to lead in that area if you're going to be successful. And the other is around DE&I, the diversity equation and really the talent equation. And I think our firm is super, super forward-leaning on both of those strategic priorities.
Talk to me a little bit about the CEOs. You mentioned the portfolio and sort of the insights you have and candidly, the influence you have there. What are they saying right now? How are they feeling? I mean, you get a window. I mean, I've jokingly said you guys are the CEOs of CEOs in many ways. You get inputs like nobody else does across industries, across geographies. Generalize for me, Scott, what you're hearing from them right now about the state of the world.
Anxiety. I think there's a real question as to where does all this go? What's going to happen with inflation? What's going to happen with interest rates? What's going to happen with consumer demand around the world? And so what we spend a lot of time on is just sharing with them what we're seeing through our window. So we have meaningful equity